I'm going to call to order the meeting of May 18th, 2021 of the North Andover Planning Board. We're going to call roll.
Kelly Cormier,
Here.
Aaron Preston,
I'm here.
Kate Bagnesi,
Here.
Peter Boynton,
Here.
Eitan Goberg,
I am here.
John Simons. So John will be joining us in, I think, 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, we're going to go a little bit out of order on our agenda tonight. We're going to start, though, with 1450 and 1600 Osgood Street, John Smolak, request for withdrawal of the pending definitive subdivision application. It's a request to withdraw without prejudice. Is that correct, Jean?
Yes, that is correct. So he has filed the form. Upon your approval to accept the withdrawal without prejudice, I will file it with the clerk's office.
Okay. Can we get a motion to allow the withdrawal of the pending definitive subdivision application for 1450 and 1600 Osgood Street?
This is Aaron. I will make a motion to that effect.
Okay, motion made.
Second.
Seconded by Peter. Okay. Aaron, we'll go roll call vote.
Yes.
Peter?
Aye.
Kate?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so that is withdrawn without prejudice. Okay, next we are going to go to,
We'll do the withdrawal for 3 Great Pond.
oh, actually, so yeah, why don't we do, so 3 Great Pond Road, that's a request for a continuance until June 1st, 2021. So we can get a motion to continue that public hearing until June 1st, 2021.
So moved.
That was Aaron, right?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it wasn't, but I'll second.
Oh,
Okay, who motioned?
Peter.
Thank you.
okay, motion made by Peter, seconded by Aaron, thank you. Aaron, vote.
Yes.
Peter,
Aye.
Kate,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Thank you. See you then.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next I'd like to do, where is,
So you had a request for the planning board report on first
oh,
discussion item?
okay, discussion item, planning board report, Article 9, revised and updated to reflect school committee, finance committee, and select board recommendations.
Okay, so this article, as you know, you've already made a favorable recommendation along with other required recommendations that the planning board needs to make. However, there's been a revision to this article, and so I've brought it back. Suzanne Egan is here to explain the revision, and I do have one housekeeping item. So in the planning board report on page 2 lists this article. It lists it as a vote required majority vote. It is actually a 2/3 vote, so I will update the planning board report to reflect that.
Okay, and this article is transfer care and custody of land to Conservation Commission, and that's at the Stevens Estate, correct? That's
Yes.
what the article is about. Okay, thank you, Attorney Egan. Can you tell us about why we're voting on this again?
Yes, thank you.
Can I interrupt for 1
Yes.
second? I'm sorry. So I just got an email that there's intermittent loud interference sound on NACAM. It is not listenable.
It's coming in very clear to me, Eitan.
Yeah, we're perfect.
Okay.
Okay, well, hopefully for the TV folks, it'll be clear as well.
Shall I go for it?
Give me 1 second. So I would just say, anyone who's not talking, if you could please put your microphones on mute, and anyone here in the chamber, just move your microphone kind of closer to you is usually better. Okay, we're good. Kelly, Peter, we're good for you guys? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, thank you. The Article 9 has been revised so that what this does is it provides the Select Board and the Conservation Commission the authority to convey a conservation restriction on the parcel. So if you recall, this is just with regard to the portion of the Stevens Estate that is going to be The request is to place it into the care and custody of the Conservation Commission to protect the open space, watershed, and natural resources. And now we have sort of enlarged or amended the article to provide that authority for the Select Board and the Conservation Commission to convey a conservation restriction. There has been a nonprofit conservation organization identified that is interested in this, accepting the conservation restriction and providing that open space protection and working with the town on this. And so we're asking that the planning board vote favorable for this action.
And if that amendment wasn't made, then I take it, if at some point they wanted to put a actual restriction on it, they'd have to go back to town meeting, so.
Exactly. So this is sort of a housekeeping measure because conservation, once the open space portion is transferred to the Conservation Commission, that is being held for open space land. And that's sort of the only use that land can have. And so this added protection is conveying a conservation restriction to a third party actually protects it to a larger degree because then it's held by the Conservation Commission and by a nonprofit conservation organization to make sure that the property is only used for open space. And as the article was initially presented, it was only to transfer that care and custody to the Conservation Commission, and now it has both of those authorities that are required for town meeting to act on.
Okay. Questions, comments? Peter?
Yes, Eitan, can we, at this point, at this stage, can we have identified who the nonprofit is that we're referring to?
So currently, the town is discussing this with Massachusetts Audubon. They have been identified, and they are, they're incredibly we had a meeting with them, and they're incredibly enthusiastic about holding the conservation restriction and providing for the sort of public educational events for the town, and working with the town and also the Friends of the North Andover Trails to do the maintenance and to continue to have that portion of the Stevens State provide the natural resources, trails, and open space that it does now for the town residents.
Great. We'll take other members of the board. Kate, any questions, comments?
No, thank you.
Kelly?
Just a question in terms of the conservation use of the land and then the educational component of it. What falls under kind of educational activities on this land?
Well, it's environmental, educational. So it would just be to provide, so typically it's to provide nature walks or school programming. That was part of the RFP for the Stevens Estate. It was to identify a nonprofit conservation organization that would provide that educational programming to the school, for the school.
Got it. So it would be limited to truly to just educational programs, not some percentage of educational.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing now doesn't have control over that. What we're voting on now is just whether the land is restricted to a conservation restriction, which can be authorized to a third party instead of just to the town's conservation commission. In terms of the education stuff, I know that those are all ongoing discussions that are a little bit, tangential, but outside of this warrant article, is my understanding.
Right, correct. And this is that's outside of what's before the before the planning board tonight, and that's contained in Article 9.
Aaron, anything?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. So can we get a motion to recommend favorable action on the amended Article 9?
So moved.
Motion made by Peter.
This is Kate. I'll second it.
Okay. And Kate, do you want to vote?
Yes.
Okay. I'll take yes that you want to vote and that you're voting yes. Peter,
Yes and yes.
can I get your vote, Peter?
Aye.
Aaron?
I'm going to go with aye.
I will vote yes. So that is 4 yeses and or ayes. Okay,
All right, thank you.
favorable action recommended. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Mr. Simons is here and is being let into the building, so we're just going to wait for a second for that. The next thing on the agenda I would like to do is the watershed, 1987 watershed plan update. So Dan, I'll turn to you in a second, but I just want to wait for John to come in.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And Eton, if I can request, we do have another member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee on the line to help present that if we could.
That's next.
Awesome, thank you.
So the order that I want to go in, I want to do the watershed plan, then the implementation committee report, then the citizen petition and other town meeting bylaws.
The connection just got bad.
Okay.
Really bad.
So whoever just joined, mute.
Okay, how is it now? Not good. Weird. I didn't do anything. Okay, so we're having audio issues to the public. Peter?
Yes?
Did I just hear you have your hand raised? Is that to indicate that we're
do?
still, yeah,
How's that?
better. How's the sound?
Much better.
Much better.
Okay. Can anyone who's watching at home email Gene and let us know if the sound is working currently at 7:19 p.m.?
Community TV asking for his assistance to clean this up.
Okay, we're working on the sound to the best we can for people at home. All right, Dan, why don't you update us on the watershed?
Sure thing. I'm going to share my screen. I'll give a quick presentation and then we can get to questions if we want. Right. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. All right. This is Dan Beckley, staff planner with the town. Myself and a group of people representing different departments and interests in town have been working with a consultant on an update to the 1987 Lake Cochicowick watershed plan. And I'm going to give just a little update on that. You'll see on the bottom of the screen there's a link for anyone who's interested. We have a web page on the plan, and you're welcome to look at the different things we've produced and resources that are, being delivered as a part of that. So as background, the last watershed plan for the Lake Ochigawik watershed was in 1987. I believe it followed a Giardia outbreak. That plan informed a lot of the policies and sort of regulating activities that occur on Lake Ochigawik today, such as the water treatment plant was a big investment that came out of that plan. Of course, it being from 1987 was quite outdated. The 2018 master plan made a number of recommendations that sort of informed how we should manage the watershed, but are certainly not, you know, an entire watershed management plan on their own. And so, in the early fall, the town, I believe in the early fall, the town put out a bid to work with a consultant to put together this plan. We contracted with Weston and Sampson. In October, the planning process started in November. The scope of work that was being requested was a gap analysis, so looking at old planning and policy initiatives and things like that to identify where we could be doing better, what data is missing, and also looking at our policies such as the Watershed Protection District, and similarly identifying where we could be doing better. There's also a stakeholder engagement component, so we've done a couple of those meetings, and there's going to be another one as the plan is wrapping up. Also a field assessment and sampling of the water quality at different areas around the watershed, and then using the data we have to model how the watershed works and how we can best manage it, as well as an education plan, an action plan, and the watershed management plan, which is the whole of these different components. So the timeline, the project started in around November. In December, they conducted the first pass at the gap analysis and data review. And so that looked at around, I think, 19 different documents the town has produced since the 80s, I would guess, I think, and essentially looked at where we didn't have enough data to be effectively managing the watershed. And the new plan is supposed to meet 9 elements that the EPA lays out that qualify a watershed management plan for certain grant funding. And so they looked at where we were missing those components. And essentially, based on that, are determining what data we do need for the plan that they are working on now. We work together with stakeholders who either do work in the watershed as well as those who own property in the watershed to put together a smaller stakeholder group. And we had that meeting in early January. And that essentially was to just get a sense of, what people experience in the watershed, what their concerns are, as just an early start to beginning to do work in the watershed, as an early start to the plan. Later in the winter, we went out and did a walk of the watershed at different key points to observe, where there are areas of concern, where we think maybe we should be doing more sampling, and just to get a general sense of, the lay of the land. This was especially important for the consultant, as many of us have already been around the watershed, but they got to observe, take pictures, and identify sort of areas of concern. We then had a follow-up meeting with the smaller stakeholder group and a public meeting in March, and these were a bit more interactive. So we did sort of analysis where people worked with different members of the consulting team to identify where there were strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats related to the well-being of the watershed. Following that, the consultant put together an action plan of recommendations, as well as an education plan identifying, how we can do better outreach and inform people about watershed issues. They recently wrapped up modeling of the watershed, which looked at land use around the watershed, and based on that determined, where pollutants are coming from, or what land uses are have the most runoff of pollutants, and based on that, identifying where the best infrastructural best management practices, also known as BMPs, could be placed to mitigate any pollutant runoff. Next up will be sampling, which they will do in early June, and this will be used to, benchmark against the 1987 plan, as well as sampling done by the water treatment plant. Additionally, they will test areas that are not typically tested to see whether or not these are areas we should be testing in the future. And then towards the end of June, we will have a near final draft of the plan, have a public meeting, get the last of the input and comments, and then wrap up the plan. So some of the initial findings, looking at zoning, they did a new delineation of the watershed. It's not substantially different, but you will see the new delineation in sort of a green aqua color, and the old delineation in blue. So there definitely are areas where it is where there are differences, and that is worth noting in the zoning. And the other recommendation was to update buffer zone language, which I believe is on the warrant for town meeting. Some of the things that were missing from the 1987 plan were a lack of identification of specific pollutant sources, where there could be pollutant load reductions from either specific land uses or clearly identified sources. There was just a notable amount of missing data that would have been required by the EPA for a 9-element plan. There wasn't substantial public outreach to inform the plan, and there was a lack of sort of an action plan with a timeline and metrics to sort of evaluate how implementation is going. So those are the gaps that are identified and will be filled by the coming update. So in stakeholder engagement, we talked to a number of people to sort of identify what people's concerns are, and what are the issues in the watershed. Fertilizer, pesticides, pet waste, runoff, waterfowl, trash and litter were some of the most notable and most prominent concerns that people had. There was a survey we also used to get responses that got a fair number of responses. The SWOT exercise is the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats exercise that we did at the public meeting. That was very helpful in getting a sense of what people would like to see, as well as what issues are out there. It was fairly well attended, both the public meetings, and one of the biggest takeaways is that people really like the watershed and being able to use the open space in the watershed. This, of course, needs to be managed well to prevent the pollutants that we see in the watershed. Another thing we found looking at the data was that there are some sampling data errors that will need to be addressed in the future to better understand where pollutants are coming from in the watershed, as well as what their impact is. Just some key areas we noted in our walk around the watershed, as well as areas that were noted by people in the meetings and in the survey. So walking along 133, the Great Pond Road section on the north side of Lake Cochicowick, there is substantial erosion running almost running under the bank and almost up to the road. The Department of Public Works is aware of this and has looked at funding for basically doing improvements along that area to stabilize the bank and the road. There's runoff and erosion on sort of the fields and near the boat launch at Brooks School that was noted by a couple people. And many people have noted that there's pet waste along the shoreline in Lake Cochicowick. That's a major concern that not only came up a lot, but could have a substantial impact on the watershed. And so that was certainly something that was focused on heavily when looking at recommendations. And so next steps, as I mentioned, in early June, we're going to go out and they're going to be sampling different areas all around the watershed to have data to sort of inform how the water quality stands and where it stands in comparison to 1987. We're going to have that final public meeting that we'll get final comments at, and then we will finalize the plan. Some of the major recommendations are going to involve pursuing grants. As I said, this 9-point plan does qualify us for certain federal grants for non-point source pollution. So that's one option. And a lot of this is going to be related to just having a strong sort of organized implementation effort. It's going to require a lot of different departments to be involved and have input in order to effectively coordinate the different strategies, as there's a lot of different jurisdictions over watershed management issues. And that is all I have for the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll stop sharing my screen.
For 1 second. So we have an update in the audio. It should be working fine now. I have an email from a Kevin O'Donnell stating that the quality of this broadcast is unacceptable and should not be considered a public forum. I would just add that the agenda as posted indicates that we'll do everything but in our means to have a meeting in this format. And if for some reason that we're unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover's website an audio and video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. When the meeting gets posted tomorrow, it will have the full audio. And so it was working fine in our room. However, at NACAM, they needed to reboot the system, which has been done. And I've confirmed with at least one person that's been in touch with me that the quality seems fine now as of 7:30.
I forgot to read that for the first time in a year and a quarter. I forgot to read
The agenda
the
thing.
agenda statement.
So it's unfortunate, but we're half hour in. The recording did capture all the audio. It will be posted, and hopefully we're good going forward.
And we've also not done any public hearings yet,
Correct.
other than ones that have been continued, so.
Yep.
Okay. All right, well, we're hopeful that the next meeting may be in person, so we'll see what happens. Okay, let's, questions, comments from members of the board? Anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, this is Aaron. I have a quick question as to whether, I guess this goes along with road runoff, but I noticed just in my own experience that there seems to be a very liberal application of salt during the winter, and I was wondering if that is being investigated as a potential issue for the health of the watershed.
So that many of us noted was not in the draft action plan that the consultant provided, and so we are encouraging them to investigate that as an option. It's definitely one of a concern that came up multiple times, and it's a simple solution to use less salt or sand or other de-icing methods on the road. We would just like to see it represented in the plan, and so I think in the final plan that will be a strategy.
Yeah,
Great, thank you. That's all I had.
This is Peter Aton. I'm the planning board rep on the watershed plan update. I think having reviewed the early draft, one of the takeaways is that we're still waiting for a substantial amount of information and analysis, and so it's a little too early to make a judgment on how we're doing. The road runoff with de-icing, not only on the shoreline roads but throughout the watershed, is a pretty significant factor, and so it's a surprise that the consultant has not already included that. But as Dan said, there's lots of comment to now add it. It was a surprise and a bit of a concern that a portion of the data the consultant said was not usable. It's related to the phosphorus content. That's a key aspect of watershed and lake management because that is a significant factor in algae blooms. So that was a surprise, and we're looking for recommendations in this update so that we can have a higher level of confidence in the usability of the data going forward. And I would like to say that I think Dan has done a terrific job shepherding this effort. It's a lot of elements, and I think with the quality of the update he's provided, it's an indication that he's really doing a lot of work here to ensure that we get the maximum value out of this update to the watershed plan. Very important given all the impacts to our only source of drinking water. So I'd like to just thank Dan for his efforts, while at the same time noting there's a ways to go yet. We're not at the finish line. But thanks, Eitan.
Thank you, Peter.
So wow. So I have a question. No, I turned my microphone on. That's why that was my fault. Okay, so once we get this report, so I know we still have sampling to do. We finish the report, get recommendations or suggestions, strategies. What happens from there in terms of the planning board? Like, are there going to be specific roles for the board as opposed to roles for, like, I don't think we have that much control over de-icing, right? That's more the town and DPW. But where do we see the planning board as having roles once this report is finished? And that's, I guess, for Dan or Peter, who's been involved.
So one of the main things, though not particularly substantial, will be updating the watershed protection district and other zoning. Based on their review, the watershed protection district is pretty strong standard. They even indicated that some of the regulations might be unnecessarily strong, but there aren't too many revisions on that front. Just really looking at what uses are allowed, what triggers, what level of site disturbance triggers special permit or site plan review. They haven't identified, there aren't any recommendations that specifically identify the planning board as an actor, but I think largely zoning and review, it's mainly just a matter of we will want people from different departments represented as we implement things, even if it's not going to be an action carried out by the planning board. It's just a multi-jurisdictional issue. I don't have a ton of input on exactly what you guys would be carrying out at this point.
Eitan, I can make some comments there. It's a great question.
Hold on, Peter. Let's go John, and then Gene, and then back to Peter, okay?
Dan, one of the things you brought up is you talked about best practices, and I remember the experience that we had where we were doing the plaza where Maggie's was obviously pretty close. And Gene, you probably remember it. We spent an incredible amount of time ensuring that we had what were the best practices. I think we had them, but it's always good to have the utmost amount of technical expertise to deal with it so you're absolutely sure you're ending up with the most you could conceivably do at a reasonable cost. Yeah.
And I'll just add, until we get the recommendations pinpointed down, I guess we don't know exactly who's going to carry them out, but they're going to require funding, and I'm sure through Dan's efforts with grants and things like that, we'll have involvement in implementing things, but as you know, things cost funding. DPW oversees the water treatment plant and staff. And so this report will ultimately be presented to the town manager and the select board and be prioritized. So.
The one other point I wanted to make, and Peter, but this is something I picked up from you, is that you stressed repeatedly the importance of ongoing sampling. And that, frankly, unless you do it on a regular basis, you're never going to know. I mean, if you don't measure something, you're not going to know whether you have problems. So it's actually I think a little bit disappointing that we don't already have really good sampling data, but I think in my mind, one of the most critical aspects will be whether we do it quarterly, semi-annually, but the point is, we'll have a track record of what the metrics are and what the pollutants is, because then we can correct problems. Right now, we don't really know, other than anecdotally, where the problems are.
And that is one of the big wins of updating this plan, is because we have identified those trouble. It's the raw water data sampling, which I know Peter is aware, we've been asking for some times for that data in order to do a comparison over the years since '87. And what the consultant team did identify is there's some deficiencies, and we can fix them going forward.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important.
Peter, did you have anything?
Yeah. To John and Daniel and Jean's point, the consultant, one of their absolutely key contributions here was they have identified a problem with the data, and I don't think we have all the details yet as to what it was, but at a minimum, the labeling of the phosphorus is ambiguous, and when trying to compare phosphorus readings over a period of time, there's different types of phosphorus measurements, and if that labeling is not done correctly, then the data is not usable. So this is a critically important aspect of this update, that the consultant has helped us identify that, and the report will have recommended practices so that we won't be at risk of this going forward. Now, it means that a lot of the data that was already collected, we can't use that part of it, but it also means that we'll have a clean break with a usable data set going forward. So the other point I wanted to make was your point, Eitan, your very good question about what will the impact be to the planning board. And I think Daniel kind of summed this up very well, that this update is identifying a multi-jurisdictional need to manage the lake. This was, in my mind, a second absolutely key contribution of the consultant to help us articulate that. I think that, there may be a general perception that, oh, the water treatment plant manages the lake and the watershed, and they really don't. And this has been noted in master plans going back 30 years, that the water treatment plant has a critical role to treat the water and produce potable drinking water that meets EPA standards. But this also goes to John's point that for many years now, we've been trying to get sampling data that the planning board could use to evaluate what are the impacts of the watershed on the lake. And to John's point, this can't be done with just a single set of sampling. It has to be a series of sampling over time so that we can see a trend line. And the sampling they're doing is not only for the lake itself, it's for the tributaries. So, for example, you could have a set of sampling over 6 or 12 months or 24 months that might show an uptick in phosphorus in one tributary. And you can see what portion of the watershed, which neighborhoods are draining that tributary. And to me, that is an example of the answer to your question, Eitan. We need a better multi-jurisdictional process in the town where, because the water treatment plant does the sampling, they need to provide to, I would say, both the planning board and the health department, here are the trend lines over time for the lake and the tributaries. And what we would look for, what the Board of Health would look for, is, are there spikes? And where are they? And the planning board is the special permit authority for the watershed, not the DPW, not the water treatment plan. So it would be up to the planning board to say, we need to look at what's happening in this section of the watershed, unless, of course, the following sample shows that peak no longer exists. To me, this is critically important because these measurements of the lake and the tributaries are the only, or one of the few, objective ways to measure how are we doing in our role as the special permit authority for the watershed with respect to protecting the quality of the drinking water in the lake. So that's an answer to your question.
So, I mean, I'd be curious then in the report about one, what kind of multi-jurisdictional group or control would be suggested, but also two, how do we make that actually happen, right? So if it's supposed to be the planning board in conjunction with DPW, in conjunction with the Board of Health, how do you actually regulate that or make it happen? And I would think that, well, maybe you make it part of the watershed protection district bylaw somehow. I mean, I think you got to legislate it somehow, put it in a code somewhere that on a certain amount of basis that certain testing needs to be done, and these are the people that are overseeing it. Because if it's not written down somewhere, if it's just an agreement or a suggestion by a consultant, it's going to disappear over time. So
I think you're absolutely right, Eitan, and we don't want these type of issues to continue to perpetuate. And as I said, if you go back 3 master plans, you'll see very clear comments in the master plan saying we do not have a process for overall management of both the lake and the watershed. We have a very good process for producing the drinking water. Water treatment plant consistently meets EPA standards for the drinking water. But if we don't have a process to protect the raw water and manage the watershed, then we risk those treatments becoming expensive or even beyond the limits at some point, at least as conceivable. So having that management structure is, I think, critically important. It's not easy because it's cross-jurisdictional, and I agree with you. This piece should end up in the bylaws as part of the watershed protection district and identify who the necessary participants are. I completely agree with that.
okay, so Dan, keep working. Gene, Peter, everyone who's doing it, just keep doing that. Just hopefully our comments and suggestions are helpful guidance going forward. Okay, great. All right, let's do go back to the top. Master Plan Implementation Committee FY21 third quarter report.
Thank you, Eitan. This is Kelly Cormier. I'm joined by John Strauss, who is another member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. I'm just going to share the report here if I can figure out how to do that. Where's it now?
Yeah, they're not complaining.
Sorry, I'm working through how to share the report. Give me a second here. All right, here you are. Are you able to see the report? Are you able to see the report?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. All right. So in the third quarter of the year, so we put this as our third quarterly report for the Master Plan Implementation Committee. We went through our largest, as people can read the report here, but our largest or kind of most significant piece of work was the committee wanted to develop a framework to help us evaluate different plans or petitions to help us evaluate any master plan intersections that were taking place. So we developed a framework, and we've now used it twice, and that's included in the report. And we did it for the citizens petition for multifamily housing moratorium, as well as for Royal Crest Trinity Financial plan. And we went through and how we created the framework, and I'll show that both of them are in the report, is we use the framework to evaluate against each of the 100+ strategies in the master plan. And we went through, and for each of the strategies and how it related to within its goal area, its master plan element area, we evaluated it on its own as to whether the committee found that either was positively, negatively, or neutral, or was an in progress impact to that strategy. So as you see from what I'm showing now, the first one was related to the first framework that we implemented was against the multifamily housing moratorium. And you can see where we list here for the first strategy, we show that we felt if the the petition was implemented or approved, there would be a positive for this first strategy, a positive impact. In this case, as the committee went through, we felt it was relevant to indicate whether the impact was direct or indirect. So we also indicated that in the last column. Few things to note with this framework is we would, same as we cautioned or counseled the select board, all strategies aren't created equal. So we would not recommend adding up the number of strategies, how many positive, how many negatives, how many neutrals. The strategies aren't made the same. Some impact a lot more residents, some are much more expensive, some require more effort. So it doesn't make sense we didn't see that it made sense to total them up. So that's one thing to think about as you look at the framework. What we'd really like to get is an understanding, and we had the same request for the select board, is that if this type of framework is helpful to the planning board for looking at these types of plans or petitions as we went through. I don't know, John, if you have anything to add.
Can I ask a question first?
Yeah, absolutely.
What does in progress mean?
And progress is we felt at the time when thank you for asking the question. It means we didn't, at the point in time when we did the evaluation, we didn't feel we had enough information to evaluate. And both frameworks are point in time. We don't expect to continue to update them, unless there's a request from the select board or planning board to do so. But that was, I think with the Royal Crest piece, we felt the strategy applied, but we just didn't have enough information to say one way or the other at that point in time.
Okay. John, anything to add?
Yeah, so just real quick, and as I mentioned the same thing when we presented to the select board. A master plan is a great tool. Much time and effort was spent in preparing it. But if you don't, it's a working document. It evolves. So you need to constantly, one of the things, it's best served by constantly looking at it, weighing in on it, and see where development throughout the town lies within it and how it's meeting the stated goals. So that's this is our initial effort at creating a structure to do so. And I think if given time to glance through the comments, you'll see the resultant of much thought from the master plan implementation committee and its subcommittees where we've broken up to each element subcommittees to weigh in on that. And it's our thought that hopefully this is a tool that the select board and the planning board can use to your advantage in future development throughout town.
So did you take a vote on each one of these items? So for each one, did you say, okay, let's vote on strategy number 3 as to Trinity Financial? Is it positive, negative, in progress, or neutral? And do that for all of them?
We didn't vote on each item individually, but we did it as a group. Okay. So there was very few, I think, where it wasn't consensus, but we typically, John, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was maybe only 1 or 2 where there was strong feelings either way. But we reached consensus, and then we voted on the framework as a whole, on the completed framework as a whole.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Were there any ones that were particularly that people had a significant debate on? I was just curious, or was it pretty much these ones we felt were positive, these ones we felt were negative?
There wasn't any strong debate. People had strong feelings. I think things to keep important on the framework is that we looked at, and I think where most of the discussion happened is we made sure we looked at each strategy individually So that's for good or bad. That's how the framework is done. So I think once we all kind of set ourselves, if there was debate, it was kind of go back to think of, okay, what this strategy all on its own, making sure we all level set on what that strategy is. We reached consensus as a committee. So I think that's all strategies aren't created equal. So you can't add up, positive negatives. It's a point in time and each one is taken individually. So for better or worse, that's the approach that we took up till now.
Okay.
And
so
I'll add to that, Ton, is that, the biggest internal debates was more of, is it a direct or indirect action? Are we talking short term, long term here? A lot of the stuff as it was debated, it was kind of evident from the start whether it had a positive, neutral, or negative connotation or implementation of the stated goal. So it was more of, where do we see it? Is it affecting it now, or can it affect it down the line?
Okay. And so with the housing moratorium, it looks like there were 3 items that listed as positive, 3 as neutral, and about 13 as negative. And then with Trinity, we had, in terms of the master plan, we had 3, 6, 9. Looks like mostly positives, 9 or 10 positives, a couple of neutrals, and a couple in progress.
If you're going to count them.
Well, I mean, I guess it's more of the overall, right? So whether it's 10 positives, there's none that are ranked as negative for Trinity, right? In terms of master plan. Again, that doesn't mean it, okay, that means it's a perfect project, everything's a go. It just means in terms of some of the strategies in the master plan, it didn't have a negative impact on them. And then I guess the multifamily, some of the things that I take away from this, which I think are helpful, is some of the stated goals of the moratorium were, we heard talk about senior housing, but actually the master plan committee says that this is a direct negative on, senior market and affordable housing. So I find those things interesting. If you look at, not necessarily each number, 13 is greater than 3, but there's a significantly more negative for the moratorium than positive, and the opposite with Trinity. Again, those all could be small points, but just an overall perception is just interesting.
And as we went through the framework, I'll be honest, I think we were not surprised necessarily, but the result going through the results and seeing the end, we kind of went, huh. But it was one of those things where it was a very kind of formulaic approach by going through strategy by strategy. So it truly gave us that logical look at each one.
And one of the other good things is that a lot of times, I think on many sides of issues, since we've done the master plan, there have been cherry-picked quotations to really support kind of any argument, because there's so many different things in the master plan that you can take one line from one strategy and combine it with one line from another strategy and then put it to support your position. And that's really on any side of a position. But I like that this takes the strategies as a whole and measures it against, okay, this particular concept, does this proposal have a negative, or just on this strategy as a whole, not as to each individual line. So I think it's a helpful framework, I think.
Yeah, and we looked at all of the strategies and said there were some that we kind of looked at and we even debated, does this apply or not? Is there an intersection here? And then we said, no, there's not, and said it's not applicable and took them out. So we did look at all of them and, had that discussion as well as a committee.
And I'll add, just as an example, relative to the discussion on the Royal Crest development, a lot of the master plan implementation goals that we were weighing was, all right, how much of this is this directly affected by Royal Crest, or is the Route 114 corridor project overlapping or controlling that issue rather than Royal Crest? So therefore, we maybe determined that was a neutral or no, not applicable.
Okay. Any other members of the board have comments? Okay. Great. Thank you. I think that was one of the, all of the reports have been helpful, but I think the timeliness and the ability to use the master plan and the implementation and give us guidance about things that are happening right now. Law and order ripped from the headlines is helpful. So thank you.
And just so if there is any additional feedback from the board on things that we could also include in this framework, this is something that we've done it twice now, and we've gotten a positive reaction from both the select board and the planning board. If there's anything else that we can change as we continue going forward, because we want to try to use that same, have a repeatable framework, would be great.
Okay. So let's move on to Article 32, Citizen Petition, Article 32, Joe Finn and others, multifamily housing moratorium. So this is a continued public hearing, Jean, right?
Yes.
So I should hopefully for the last time read
Yes.
my statement here. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this public hearing of the North Andover Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting or this hearing can be found on the town website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 26 or online at www.northandovercam.org. And I think we've figured out our technical issues. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceeding as soon as possible after the hearing. And it's my understanding that we'll be able to post something with today's meeting tomorrow. It's
It goes up in the morning.
so
It goes up on YouTube and then subsequently on NACAM.
if you missed any of or could not hear any of the discussion items earlier, we didn't do any public hearings other than ones that were continued. Those will be available to listen to tomorrow. If any members of the public would like to participate in this public hearing, please email your question or comment prior to or during the meeting to Jean Enright at JENRIGHT@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be read during the proceeding and responded to accordingly. Okay, so we do have, I believe we got a comment from the applicant to be read. Is that correct, Jean?
Yes, so the
Okay, so I'm going
file,
to do that.
the file name is 210517 Finn, public comments on moratorium.pdf.
Okay. Okay, so it's an email sent from Joe Finn, Monday, May 17th, 2021. Hi, Gina, I'm requesting the attached statement relative to the moratorium be entered in the public record during tomorrow's planning board meeting. Have a great night. Thanking you in advance. So we're going to read that now. Again, I'm going to read this word for word, not comment, this is from public comment, RE moratorium by Joe Finn, petitioner. Again, it's his position. Based on the fact that the town had conducted a series of studies on recently approved large-scale housing developments, Mr. Finn requested any and all impact studies in addition to any and all peer reviews for the following housing developments. 21 High Street, RCG East Mill, 51 market rate units. 505 Sutton Street, redevelopment, former Knights of Columbus, 136 market rate units. Avalon Bay, 200 market rate units, and Forgetta Farms, 1220 Osgood Street, Princeton Properties, 192 market rate units. Based on Mr. Finn's review of the documents provided by the town, Mr. Finn found that 3 out of the 4 projects did not provide any estimated cost to the school department, police department, fire department, or recreation department. However, in 2 of those projects, which totaled 243 units, the developer simply claimed minimal impacts to the school, police, and fire department with no cost estimates or supporting documentation. It appears as if no third-party peer review was conducted on either of these 2 projects to validate these claims. None of these projects reflected costs for elder services, library services, veteran services, or recreation use services. One project, 505 Sutton Street, former Knights of Columbus, lacked a fiscal impact analysis altogether. In addition, 3 of the 4 properties lacked a third-party fiscal impact peer review to reflect estimated costs for school, police, and fire departments. Avalon Bay was the only project reflecting costs to the school department. $270,000 based on supplies, bus, and teacher. Police department, $11,600 based on number of calls. Fire department, $33,600 based on number of calls. And culture recreation department, $12,400, but no supporting documentation. More importantly, there is no source documentation reflecting estimated costs to the school department, police department, fire department, elder services, library services, veteran services, or youth recreation service for all 4 projects, totaling 579 market rate units in the aggregate. As such, Mr. Finn is respectfully requesting a comprehensive study to determine the estimated cost of these projects on town services in conjunction with the agreed-upon water and sewer capacity studies. Mr. Finn believes it is critically important to calculate the estimated cost of these 4 projects on the town to fully understand the impact associated with any future large-scale developments. It is also important to highlight 4 points presented in one of the fiscal impact analysis reports. 1, today the town's population density is 1,161.5 people per square mile, higher than the state average. North Andover's average class size is higher than almost all comparison school districts. All of the elementary schools have 1 or more grades that currently exceed the school committee's target class size, and multifamily rental tends to be the highest generator of calls for police services. Thank you. Okay. Gene, any comments or information regarding some of those, what's been provided? I mean, I feel like we've done a bunch of the stuff that's mentioned in there, or it's been done in just a different manner than what is being done with the Royal Crest.
So as far as the aggregate study, at the last meeting associated with the Trinity proposal was an aggregate of school capacity study that included school children from all of those developments. And so I think certainly the school capacity one has been accounted for. In addition, in your packet is an email, it was published by Sarah Brush on our town social media for an upcoming school capacity public forums. The focus of the school capacity subcommittee is to aid in the town in making the best decisions regarding the possible renovation, expansion, and construction of schools within our community. Facilities Master Plan Phase 2 for the town of North Andover includes 4 important school projects, the renovations and possible additions to Atkinson, Franklin, Kittredge, and North Andover Middle School. The goal for these projects include updating our older schools so that they meet code and meet needs of our students, providing modern facilities conducive to 21st century learners, ensuring equity among our schools, and providing enough space capacity in our schools to provide needed support services for all the students, impact class size, and accommodate enrollment growth going forward. There'll be public forums associated with that subcommittee.
I think tonight was actually the 3rd public forum regarding that, and then it's going to go back to, I think, the committee to make recommendations to go to the school committee in relatively soon. And I know the town manager talked about, then taking those suggestions and then taking the data we get here and putting it all into kind of a comprehensive plan.
Yep. So I will say for all the projects listed, there was a thorough traffic analysis that was peer-reviewed. There was civil and stormwater analysis that were peer-reviewed. Mr. Finn is correct in terms of the fiscal analysis. So Avalon Bay went through a peer review on the fiscal. The Princeton property, Minco, and the Mills, East Mill, provided a fiscal analysis. I will say the former Knights of Columbus was not as detailed as the others. However, all of those projects go up for department review, and that's what's not reflected in the comments tonight. So department review is done by police and fire, the school department, whenever it's a multifamily. I think at each of those meetings, the school department, again, I think at each of those meetings, other than possibly the former Knights, Jim Bailey, the assistant superintendent, came and spoke to the board and provided feedback in terms of what the applicant submitted for school-age children and what he deemed to be the impact.
And as I recall, most of a significant amount, other than the Avalon, they were all market rate and mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms. So
Correct.
as I recall, that the school impact was pretty low, and that police and fire did not express any concerns other than sometimes, with sweat pass
Right.
analysis and stuff like that, but not as to the number of calls or needing more equipment or things like that.
Right.
And I mean, I think one other point to be raised related to the KSC project is that part of the trade-off there was that we got a site for a senior center at no cost. So I mean, there's a very substantial public benefit there. Now, one could argue that, maybe it wasn't worth the trade-off, but in fact, it did exist. So
Yeah.
I think, Gene, you and other folks were looking at it very robustly, looking at all the trade-offs before we made that decision, so.
And the KFC one and the Forgetto Farms, I mean, they all went to some sort of town meeting, right, as well, for zoning relief. Avalon did a while back before the project came.
It was 2016, though.
Okay.
They put in the sub-district A historic mill area, which kind of broke off from the downtown overlay and created the path for that application to go forward. And so you're right, Princeton property, the former Knights of Columbus, and Avalon all had targeted zoning amendment articles that went through town meeting before the permitting process began.
So I know that, so I guess it just comes to me that I know that maybe more eyes are on this now with Royal Crest, but the town and this board and the departments have been doing their due diligence on all of these projects as they come up, and even work on the aggregate. So a lot of it seems kind of, I don't know, that we've done the work already, and people may not have been paying attention because it wasn't as, the projects weren't as large in scale individually, but it's all been kind of noted. And I just, talking about this particular petition and looking at the master plan implementation committee, it seems to me that a lot more harm is done by this moratorium than good. So.
And I would say the other piece of the puzzle is you had the outside counsel memo that kind of raised a little concern as to the form of the article as well.
Okay. Members of the board, any other comments?
So I'll say the select board recommended unfavorable action at their
So-
last meeting,
Yeah, was that 4-1? Is that correct?
4-1.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Finn, yeah, if you'd like to add anything or
Yeah.
say anything now, it would be great.
Yeah, if I could, I
course.
appreciate all the comments that are being made. I was under the impression that with the studies, I would be getting data suggesting the costs for the town services. That's what the comprehensive plan is all about. I think all of the reasons or information you just provided is a very good argument for having the comprehensive study. To have no fiscal impact analysis and then say that they donated land to us, so there's a benefit there, I think really highlights the need for doing this. When I looked at that I was given, I didn't find any of the information that I had mentioned in my statement. I think you keep mentioning that you did all these studies, but if you could just show me the costs associated from the police department, the fire department. I keep hearing that you went there, and I believe you did. But the whole purpose of the comprehensive study is to let people know what the true costs are individually and in the aggregate. Now, we do see some of those studies. If you go to Avalon, they give you that information. Now, if you go to another project that's almost the same size, you get none of that information other than it's a minimal impact. Now, I don't know what that means. You really need, in my opinion, to calculate what minimal impact means, because what we're doing here is that we're saying minimal impact, and we see that for a couple of projects. So 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 1, because we're not adding all these up. So we're saying minimal impact, minimal impact, minimal impact. Well, that could be a big impact over the three. And so we really need to have the figures. And what I'd like to see that is in some sort of written report. Anytime I look at data or anybody tells me something, at least in my other line of work, I would like to say, where is that where I can look at it? Show me the data. And I don't see the data in any of the reports that I just mentioned. If you could give me that, that would be great. Now, I don't know. I have to take a look now whether or not all the information was given to Royal Crest for the aggregate of the schools. I read some of that impact statements, and it said they took it from the 2020 enrollment data. Maybe it's changed since then. But the 2020 enrollment data wouldn't include the 4 projects that I just mentioned. And so, because the people aren't even there yet. So it would be great to have that information. Another thing I would like to mention, if I could, is the implementation committee. It's my understanding that they invited Trinity to come and talk to them, give them a presentation. It's my understanding also, when the committee was asked to invite me there, they said no. And if you look at those strategies, and I looked at all of them, there's 2 or 3 strategies that might be affected by the moratorium. You mentioned one that you said about the affordable housing. The moratorium, that's only allows for affordable housing. 40B is not affected by the moratorium. You can build 40B projects with the moratorium. And so that, in my opinion, that report that the committee gave, the implementation, that is completely biased. And I can go through strategy after strategy and show you where there is absolute bias in that. And just the appearance of not inviting me when they're going over, but they invite Trinity, suggests there is an appearance. And we can argue whether or not there isn't. I think a reasonable person would say, why wasn't that person granted the ability when the other party was? And so I want to raise that issue. And I'll give you just a quick example, because I read over the strategies, and one of them, is discourage traffic in residential neighborhoods using context-sensitive roadway design and traffic calming solutions. This was under the transportation goal. This was in there because there was deep concern over traffic and safety along neighborhood streets. So what they were looking to do is slow the traffic down. So if we had 12,500 cars coming down 114, the concern was they would go down the side streets, Johnson Street, Chestnut Street. This was one of their strategies to try to reduce that traffic. It's try to reduce, at least slow down the traffic. Now, the committee said the moratoriums are negative. The moratoriums, you didn't have those projects going in. You wouldn't have them going down the side streets. This is an absolute positive, but it's just not the answer that they gave. It's the explanation. This is why they said it was a negative. If there's a development for multifamily where you could get infrastructure improvements, they're talking about shrinking roadway width as part of it, lowering speed limits. So they would say you could get infrastructure improvements out of it. You've denied yourself the opportunity to do it. So they're saying we need to build more so we can then put, I guess, narrower streets down the side streets, or we could lower the speed limits down the side streets. That is so biased in their opinion. And the entire committee said, yes, it's a negative. How is that possible? The only reason it's biased. That report is totally tainted, and I cannot believe that anybody would take any credence in that report. And I can go strategy after strategy, and you wouldn't believe some of the rationale, but it goes to the bias of the committee.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we're going to take a vote on our recommendation. It's going to go to town meeting, and town will have the opportunity to vote on the moratorium. Any other board members have a comment before we vote? Nope. Okay. Why don't we get a? From my sense of the board, I haven't heard much in the way of a recommendation for favorable action. So we'll take it as an unfavorable, but if you can vote, obviously people vote any way they wish to vote. So can I get a motion to recommend unfavorable action?
Yes, so moved. And I'll just make the comment, I am sympathetic with the concerns of the applicant here. I just don't think this is the right solution to the problem.
Fair. Fair. So let's get the motion. The motion made by John to recommend unfavorable action. Can we get a second?
This is Aaron, I'll second.
Okay. Let's vote. Aaron, I'll start with you.
Yes, voting for unfavorable action.
Peter?
Unfavorable.
Kate?
Yes, unfavorable.
John?
Yes, unfavorable.
And I also vote unfavorable. And I have some stronger opinions on it, but I think it just comes down to, I think it does more harm than good. And I see very little good that comes out of a moratorium. And I, having now been on this board for a few years, strongly feel that the town and the regulations that we have and the thoroughness with which people coming to do developments get the attention that they get and the citizen input that we have, that we're able to adequately deal with these developments as they come up. And that, and then we're also going to vote on the sewer recommendation for a study next. So I also vote unfavorable. So unfavorable recommendation 5-0 from the planning board. Still will go to, it goes to town meeting and we'll have a vote. And when can we tell everyone when that is? It confirmed, right?
June 15th,
June 15th. Do we have a time?
I think 6 o'clock.
Okay. We think 6 o'clock, but pay attention to that to be announced for sure later on. Okay. Thank you. So continued until, are we going to have a planning board meeting that day or no?
So we have one June 1st.
Yeah.
So typically you leave these hearings open until right prior to the meeting. I hear it's still going to be an outdoor meeting, so
Yeah.
we typically would be able to meet, it would just be an outdoor meeting half hour before the town meeting.
Okay. So should we continue to June 1st or just continue all of them until June 15th? I mean, are we going to take them up? We've recommended.
Just in case something comes up,
Okay.
might as well carry it on the agenda.
So all zoning and warrant articles continued until June 1st. If we get any additional public comment, Jean, please let us know on any of the articles.
Yep.
Okay. Planning board consent item support for townwide sewer and water capacity study. So can we get a motion to indicate our support for a townwide sewer and water capacity study?
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by John,
Second.
second by Peter. All right, John vote?
Yes.
I vote yes. Kate?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Peter?
Aye.
Okay, that planning board's approval and of that particular study. Okay, Mass DOT?
I'm just going to ask you a technical thing. Do you want to read into the record the public hearing for the planning board sponsored?
Which one?
Just to read the governor's order prior to that, because that is also a continued public hearing. I think you just grouped them all together, but it's two different agenda items.
But we're just continuing them all, right?
Yep.
So I'd say no. We're just continuing all and not taking, we're not introducing any new evidence or any comments. I think we can just continue them to June 1st.
Okay.
Okay. Mass DOT?
Okay, so I think it was about a month ago now, Mass DOT had been scheduled to be on your agenda to provide an overview of the Route 114 roadway improvement project. As you know, there is somewhat of an intersection between that roadway improvement project and the the discussions you've been having related to the Rural Crest redevelopment proposal. And so they are here to provide that overview. I would just note, it's not the project itself before the planning board. They're seeking some feedback. The agenda packet includes numerous comments that have been received for the Hillside Road neighborhood, kind of behind Chestnut Green, so Buckland, Peterson, Nadine, and Meadowview. The proposal that you'll see tonight contemplates a light at the Hillside Route 114 intersection. As you cross that intersection, you cross 114, the roadway would actually dead end into Chestnut Green's parking lot. It would not, it's not proposed to be a through to the bypass. It will now limit the amount of traffic that is actually cutting through Chestnut Green, which is much more than I had ever realized it was. So some sees that as a downside because they have been actively cutting through that parking lot, and now you won't be able to. What apparently happened was one resident was in favor of opening it up and providing better access as a cut-through to the whole neighborhood in general. There seems to may have been a neighborhood meeting subsequent to his submitting comments in favor of that, and numerous other residents submitted comments immediately saying they are not in favor of doing that. So Mass DOT will speak to that generally, but again, I would say that's not necessarily before the board. Mass DOT has been informed that we're trying to have internal discussions with the town manager and get some direction as to how those comments can be addressed. But for the most part, this is just an overview of the project, so that you're aware of some projects that have been before site plan review are proposed to be, the frontage is being proposed to be changed due to takings, and so stone walls and some mature landscaping and whatnot is being impacted. So I just thought the board should at least be aware of that.
So we're going to get kind of an overview of the project, let us know kind of what's happening. But I'd like to, if we can, kind of limit our planning board discussion as to either proposals that are going to be coming before us or projects that have come before us in the past that may be impacted, something where it could come back to us, right? So eventually, we're going to take a vote on the Royal Crest. So this could potentially impact our vote on that, because whether there's capacity in the road and how long the project's going to take and all of those things, and traffic impact our vote on what we could potentially allow at Royal Crest. Same with potential projects that have already come before us, Eaglewood Plaza, would modifications or things like that have to come back to us. So that I'd like to kind of be what we're thinking about when we're hearing the presentation.
And at some point, when you're ready for comments, I do have two comments. One is from Matt McGarry, who owns some of the commercial property directly abutting the Royal Crest development, and one from Jimmy DeAngelis, who I believe is representing Northmark Bank
Okay.
in these projects.
Okay. Let's hear from Mass DOT, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. My name is Larry Cash. I work in the Boston office at Mass DOT. And this evening, we're going to run through some 25% slides for you. Chuck Gregory is from GPI, and he will be going through the slides for you. Also, we have Joe Johnson and Ron Hedrick from GPI. And so we'll go through these slides. Mass DOT is still reviewing the 25% plans. And, some of these slides are we've have shown before, so we'll go through some of these again, and after we can have help answer some of the questions that you might have. Chuck, go ahead.
All right. Assuming everybody can hear me okay.
I'm sorry, before you start, I just want to read the file name. I trust you're going to review the revised presentation that was submitted
Yes.
late today? Okay, so for the
Yes.
public's view, it's attached to the agenda. The file name is REV 2021-0518, Route 114, Planning Board Presentation.pdf. Okay.
Okay. So thank you for allowing us to speak to you tonight. So thank you, Larry. We wanted to give everybody an overview of the project and the design team. My name is Chuck Gregory. I am with Greenman Peterson, or GPI. I am joined tonight by Joe Johnson and Ron Hedrick, both with GPI. MassDOT is the project proponent for this project and is administering the project design and construction. GPI is the designer of record. The project will also be given oversight from the Federal Highway Administration. So again, we simply want to give you a quick project overview and discuss with the board the process for replacing previously approved features such as mortared stone walls and landscaping, and Ron will get into that later on. So real quick, the project area goes from Waverly Road to the Mill Road Willow Street intersection, right over here. As part of the project, MassDOT plans to provide improvements to the side streets to address capacity needs at the intersections. The project length is approximately 2.1 miles along Route 114, and there are 9 intersections within the project limits. So how did we get here? The project was born from the 2010 Merrimack Valley Planning Commission corridor study that recommended many of the improvements we are proposing. In 2016, MassDOT initiated the project and brought on GPI. The following year, we began investigating different alternatives and coordinating these alternatives with the town's Department of Public Works. In 2018, we began reaching out to abutters and performing other public outreach. This consisted of reaching out directly to some businesses and holding public information meetings. Last summer, we submitted the 25% design plans. It is important to note that we are still early in the overall project design, and we will discuss the project schedule later in this presentation. So far, we've had 2 public informational meetings, one in December 2018 and the other in April 2019. We have since met with the Select Board this March, and tonight we are meeting with you all. We know there's been a lot of interest with the Royal Crest redevelopment project. We wanted to give the board a summary of the coordination held to date between MassDOT and Trinity Financial, who represents Royal Crest. Royal Crest reached out to MassDOT in summer of 2018 to introduce their project and discuss the requirements in obtaining an access permit for the proposed redevelopment. At this meeting, MassDOT also discussed the Route 114 project with them. We have since held a meeting to discuss reconfiguration of Walsh Way to align with the Royal Crest Drive at the Hawk Signal, and there's been related coordination, including coordinating entrance geometries. Last month, MassDOT met with Royal Crest, along with the owners of 510, 530 Turnpike Street, the Crossroads Shopping Center, and town staff to discuss the alignment of the Andover bypass intersection and cross-access options and opportunities. Now we will get into the why of the project. The 2010 corridor study and subsequent road safety audits identified a need for safety improvements along the corridor. As you all know, there are some sidewalks along the corridor, but it is patchwork and does not accommodate pedestrians east of Andover bypass. Currently, there is no bicycle accommodation within the corridor, not even a striped bike lane. Additionally, congestion is experienced even outside of peak travel times in certain areas. Of the 9 intersections within the project limits, 5 intersections are listed as high crash locations, meaning they are eligible for the Highway Safety Improvement Program. You can see the yellow highlighted intersections, Waverly, Peters, Andover Street, the Andover Bypass, and Mill Road as well. Here are some examples of some missing sidewalks. You see here to the left, the north side of Turnpike Street looking west towards Waverly. On the right side here, you see north side of Turnpike Street again. Again, we're looking west toward Hillside. Here you see the existing sidewalk network within the project limits, and we'll be showing this slide to you later on as well. As we mentioned previously, the pedestrian sidewalk network is fragmented. Additionally, there are currently very few signalized pedestrian crossings from one side of Turnpike Street to the other. As I said, there is no bicycle accommodation anywhere within the project limits. This is very problematic for bicycles when you have a roadway speed limit of 30 to 40 miles per hour within the corridor. These 2 areas get more than their fair share of traffic delays. You see here on the left, traffic backed up on the westbound side approaching Andover bypass. You see the Crossroads in the back. Also, on the right, you see the eastbound traffic approaching Waverly Road. One of the issues identified by the 2010 corridor study was a varying cross-section. Going west to east, the corridor goes from 4 lanes at Waverly to roughly the Tribune, and then it becomes a 5-lane section heading all the way to past Merrimack College, and then it goes down to 3 lanes past Andover bypass, and once you get to Stop and Shop, it goes back up to 5 lanes for a little bit. As you see here, we are looking to do the following: improve traffic operations and intersection safety, accommodate pedestrians and improve connectivity into the neighborhoods, accommodate bicycle users, and provide a consistent cross-section. Above all else, we want to improve safety and mobility for all people that use the roadway network, not just the motorists. These also include people walking and in wheelchairs, people on bikes, and people using transit. So first we'll show you the proposed typical section, which includes a consistent 5-lane roadway, 2 lanes in each direction, with a center area that can be used as a continuous 2-way left turn lane, or a eastbound left turn lane, westbound right turn lane, or left turn lane, or it could be a raised median. On the north side of the roadway, on the left side here, you see there will be a buffered sidewalk, and on the south side of the roadway, the right side here, will be a buffered shared use path. So now Joe will run through, give you a walking tour of the proposed improvements. I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Chuck. As Chuck mentioned, this project is really focused on improving the mobility for all users. So right now, the roadway is relatively catered toward motor vehicle traffic. So we're going to be looking to improve accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists. Pedestrian accommodations are generally improved by providing sidewalk throughout the project limits, and those sidewalks will be buffered from the roadway by a grass strip just to provide a level of comfort. The proposed bicycle accommodation for this project consists of a 10-foot shared use path. And again, given the volume and the speeds along this roadway, a separated bike facility such as a shared use path is appropriate for this type of roadway, because we want to provide a bike accommodation that's comfortable and suitable for bicyclists of all levels of experience and comfort. So that's generally speaking how we are tackling accommodations for cyclists and pedestrians. Also, at all intersections, we'll provide crosswalks and associated pedestrian phasing that will also be able to accommodate the crossing of folks that might be on the shared use path. So I'll kind of go through the project in plan view. Chuck just talked about the project in a cross-section perspective. So now I'll work from basically the west end of the project to the east end of the project, kind of looking at the highlights of some of the changes we are looking to incorporate as part of this project. So this first diagram we're looking at shows Route 114 running left to right on the screen, and then we have the intersection with Waverly Road on the left side of the screen. You can see the Boston Market's been identified. You can see Petco and Staples just to get your bearings. So some of the major changes that will occur at this location are along the eastbound approach of Route 114. So as you're coming down from 495 from that direction, from the North Andover Mall, currently there's a 2-lane approach where you have a left turn lane and a through lane. We're looking to add additional through lane at this location to improve capacity. As I'm sure you're well aware, there's significant queuing along this eastbound approach. So by providing the second through lane, we're able to really help with the capacity of this location and process more vehicles during the signal phasing. Another change or revision we're making at this location is just in front of Eaglewood Shops. As Chuck mentioned, we'll be implementing a 5-lane cross section in the roadway. Right now it's 2 lanes in each direction, and we're going to be providing that center lane, that center turning space. And the reason for that is to provide a consistent cross section, like Chuck had mentioned, throughout the corridor, so such that as motorists driving through 114 in the through lane, there should be the expectation that there won't be any left turning vehicles from a through lane. So by providing a center turn lane, we're always providing a space for left turning vehicles to get out of the stream of the through lane. So that'll help facilitate movements, left turning movements off of 114. And studies have shown that there is a benefit to providing the center turn lane, where you could expect a reduction in crashes of up to 44% when going from a 4-lane cross section to a 5-lane cross section as being proposed here.
I wonder if I may to ask a quick question. It's more related to context than anything else. Would you be able to say, just before Eaglewood, right about there, what's the width of the paved traveled surface today, and what would it be in the future? And the same thing of, when you add in the sidewalks and other amenities, what's the width of sort of the right-of-way that's being changed?
Okay, let's see here. So in terms
So,
of the, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
so today, the existing width curb to curb, this is roughly there at Eaglewood, just east of Staples, roughly 53 feet curb to curb, more or less. The roadway width, proposed curb to curb would be about 62 feet.
So it'd be another
That
9
includes,
feet, and how much in terms of, what I'm trying to figure out is along both on the Eaglewood side and the other side of the street where there's houses, how much encroachment into the property and then into the existing landscape and walls and everything is going to occur as a result of this?
so yeah, most of the impacts in this area will be to the south side, I would say. We are really constrained on the north side with some of the driveways and houses that are very close to the roadway and the grades of these driveways. So more or less the curb line is staying where it is today, give or take a few feet here or there. So keep in mind, we're adding the sidewalk on that side. So making sure that we can make the grades work on these driveways, really prevents us from widening too much on that side. So the addition of the center turn lane, it tends to push the roadway width towards the south side. So you're looking, the number 9 feet, that's pushing.
It's 9 feet, but it's more than that too, I think. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is basically you're proposing that all of the landscaping and walls that have been built on the south side are all going to be taken out as a result of this?
They will be impacted, and one of the things
Well,
that we're
be a little bit more specific. I mean, is it likely that they will be taken out completely?
yeah. So and that's part of the reason why.
Chuck, I'm sorry, but in Northmark's correspondence, they indicate 32 feet in depth is taken at a depth from the
That's
frontage.
not accurate.
Okay, so I'm just trying to put it into perspective, because that was received today, and he indicated 32.
I mean, part of the reason is it's a general thing, and I get it, what you're trying to do, and I'm not trying to impede the wheels of progress, but we have invested an incredible amount of time and money and effort over the years to have commercial projects that don't look like crap, and a lot of that deals with the landscaping, and if that's all going to be taken out, it's going to end up being a sort of, in the end, I think it's going to be actually less pedestrian friendly rather than more, but,
So I think, John, as this progresses, they do show images of Eaglewood and Northmark.
Yeah,
And
okay.
Northmark submitted something as well that shows images of their front landscaping.
Yeah, okay.
Chuck, why don't you go through the rest of the presentation and then we can hold these comments until after, because some of what you're going to be showing is reflecting some of the comments now.
Right. Yes. And, it's a very good comment, and, we certainly will get to that, and we will be looking for some input here later on in this presentation.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this next segment is up by the Eaglewood Shops. We have the Eagle Tribune on the top side of this slide here. And we'll be providing the crosswalks along all approaches to that signal at Eaglewood, the shared use path along the south side of 114, the sidewalk on the north side of 114, and again, we're providing that two-way left turn lane. How's the audio for you guys? Is it okay? Okay. All right, Chuck, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so this slide is showing the intersection of Peter Street on the left and Andover Street on the right. Again, we'll be providing crosswalks at all approaches to the intersection with the shared use path along the south side of 114. Some of the bigger changes at Peter Street that I wanted to highlight is we'll be adding an additional lane northbound on Peter Street as well as southbound. We'll be adding exclusive right turn lanes that currently do not exist. So again, by adding these additional lanes, we're able to improve operations and capacity. Now over at the Andover Street intersection, the highlights are the fact that we'll be adding an additional turn lane southbound along Andover Street. Right now, that's a 2-lane approach southbound, and we're going to be making that a 3-lane approach. Along the westbound approach of Route 114, we're going to be removing that channelized right turn that's basically a free movement today. And that right turn is now going to be part of the traffic signal operations. And the reasoning for that is, we can slow down that movement by including it as part of that signal. And we're also introducing pedestrian crossings. So it's very important for us to be able to control that right turn movement while a pedestrian phase is being served. Going to the next slide. This is showing Merrimack College on the bottom of the slide and Royal Crest on the top of the slide. We will be providing a full intersection that's signal controlled at this location. This is currently where the Hawk crossing is, where you have that pedestrian crossing between Royal Crest and the college. So we'll be converting that crossing to a full signalized intersection. We've coordinated with the college and Royal Crest in terms of their driveway locations and the lane use that they'll be needing. And basically we'll be building this intersection that those folks will then tie into. You can see that we have crosswalks along all approaches. We've introduced left turn lanes off of Route 114 into these driveways. We also have the shared use path shown in front of the college and that sidewalk again on the north side of Route 114, which will continue throughout the project limit. The next slide shows the intersection with the Andover bypass. There's quite a bit of reconfiguration occurring at this location. We're basically relocating the intersection to the east somewhat from its current location and providing a more, or I'd say a less skewed configuration than exists today. We're also getting rid of that jug handle turn movement that exists today. So we're introducing a left turn lane eastbound along Route 114 for folks to enter into Royal Crest. Some of the other big changes, we're adding a dual left turn westbound along Route 114, where Chuck is showing there that dual left onto the Andover bypass. And by providing that dual left, we can again process more vehicles during the signal phase, and we can also reduce queuing along that approach. Also along the eastbound approach of Route 114, there's currently a very high-speed right turn movement. And we're going to be tightening that movement up a little bit. We're also going to be making that a dual right turn movement and placing that movement under signal control. And again, the rationale for putting that under signal control is so that we can safely cross folks that might be using the shared use path. The shared use path does continue down the down the bypass a little stretch there, and then the bicyclists can be transitioned to buffered bike lanes on the Andover bypass, which run basically to our project limits at the Merrimack College driveway on the bypass. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned previously, this is the...
Excuse me, Eitan. Can I interrupt with a question, or are we not doing that?
I think we're going to try to hold them until the end of the presentation, if it's okay.
All right, just as a placeholder, I want to ask about that crossing you mentioned that is now being converted to a full intersection.
Okay.
Okay. All right, this slide is showing the intersection with Hillside Road. As was mentioned before, we're going to be providing a signalized configuration at this intersection. It does meet the signal warrants. So this will greatly improve access to and from Hillside Road, which is currently a challenge, certainly. There's also crosswalks provided, as you can see, which will allow a safe crossing of Route 114. We'll be introducing a fourth approach to this intersection that will basically connect in the Chestnut Green. And by doing that, we're able to, safely process left turn movements at the intersection rather than at the unsignalized driveway that Chestnut Green currently has. So that'll help to process that left turning movement over there at the new signal. A major change in this location is the fact that we are adding additional through lanes, both eastbound and westbound along Route 114. Currently, there's one through lane in each direction, and this is also a location where you see quite a bit of queuing, particularly heading westbound. And by providing 2 travel lanes in each direction, we're able to really provide a great improvement in terms of traffic flow and capacity through this location. That you can see in this diagram that we do have that shared use path, which continues along the south side of Route 114. The sidewalk is on the north side of the street. And as was mentioned, in the packet, we did hear about some feedback from Buckland Road and some of the folks that live down in that area. Some concerned about not having a connection and some in support of this proposed design that's shown here. And as Jean mentioned, we'll continue to work with the town in terms of, the best direction to move forward with this. The next slide shows the vicinity from Hillside Road down to Jasmine Plaza, where the Dunkin' Donuts is located. And again, this is currently a 3-lane roadway where you have 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. And sticking with that proposed, we want to provide a consistent cross section. This has kind of historically been a bottleneck for the corridor. We are proposing a 5-lane section, so there'll be 2 lanes in each direction with that center turn lane. And we continue to provide that shared use path and the sidewalk on the north side. The next slide shows the Stop and Shop traffic signal on the left side and the traffic signal at Mill Road, Willow Street. Generally speaking, we aren't changing the lane use at either of these intersections, but we are providing the pedestrian accommodations and continuing to provide the shared use path and the sidewalk to improve operations and accommodations for all users of this roadway. The next slide is kind of a recap of the existing sidewalk network that Chuck had showed previously, somewhat fragmented. And this next image shows what we're hoping to do with this project. And pink shows the sidewalk network that will be in place as part of this project. And the blue represents that shared use path, which again is suitable for bicyclists and pedestrians. And we just see this as a huge benefit to the community to provide connectivity, provide an opportunity for folks to navigate this roadway, which again today is very car centric, and it provides connectivity to neighborhoods that are otherwise somewhat isolated today. So we are excited about these opportunities for your community. And with this, I'll turn it back to Chuck to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Joe. So next steps, we will be conducting the design public hearing later this summer. We are working on determining what the appropriate venue will be considering the COVID pandemic. This will potentially be a live virtual meeting, so stay tuned on that. I wanted to add that this will be another opportunity for public feedback. Once we have had the hearing, we will move forward with the 75% design phase. We will continue to update the right-of-way plans. Looking forward, we anticipate the right-of-way plans being accepted in summer of 2022, I should say. The 100% design submission would follow later that fall. Construction is anticipated to begin in the spring of 2024. So I'm going to hand it over to Ron, and he's going to discuss those wall impacts that we were talking about earlier.
Thanks, Chuck. Everybody hear me all right? Good evening. Yeah, in addition to your general thoughts on the overall project, we wanted to come in tonight and get your perspective on a couple specific issues, and I think a couple of them have really been touched on already. As you can imagine, of a project this scale, there's going to be certain impacts along the corridor, both within the state right-of-way and in some cases impacts outside of the right-of-way. And this includes, as has been mentioned, impacts to stone walls, sometimes fences, and some of the buffer plantings along the corridor. Generally speaking, MassDOT has a process in place that they handle right-of-way takings and compensate owners that are impacted. And as the project progresses forward, as Chuck mentioned, right-of-way division will get more and more involved with the project and ultimately set up meetings with the butters and that sort of thing. And so that addresses a majority of the wall fence and vegetation impacts that may occur along the corridor. However, as we assess the project impacts, we recognize exactly what was noted here by the chair in the beginning, is that some of the impacts are on improvements that were the subject of past planning board approvals, and we wanted to bring those to your attention tonight. And this brings, kind of puts it in a different bucket for us. It brings up a number of questions. You know, how will these impacts affect future compliance of these projects? How will these impacts get restored, and what is the role the town will play in that process? If you go to the next slide, Chuck. So just to be clear on the project, in terms of walls, there are numbers of walls out here. A lot of them are what we call balanced stone walls. These are sort of what I call the New England legacy walls. They're walls that were typically they're loose stacked stone that were put up by landowners anywhere from hundreds of years ago to, you know, last year or something. But the picture on the right shows you an example of a kind of a balanced stone wall. They're more or less walls that have sort of stones that have been kind of brought out and placed along the edge of the right of way. On the left is a mortared stone wall, and it's not to say that all mortared stone walls fall under the kind of description of development walls, but for this project, we recognize there are a number of development walls that have a planning board approval to them, a whole record of review and a decision making. So we wanted to sort of distinguish between those two. Next slide. There's also fence types. Again, there are landowner fences along the corridor that were installed under people's own free volition. College recently put up a large granite and rail fence. I think they did that on their own volition. But there are other projects that I'm aware that were done as part of site plan approvals, such as the Crossroads Plaza. Within the zoning regulations, there are options and stipulations about buffer plantings, frontage, landscaping. As Mr. Simons noted, you know, it really is a number of lovely projects along the way that have been done over the years. So we're very sensitive to that and how we might be able to mitigate and restore some of those impacts. Next slide, please. There are also the buffer plantings, some of which are related to planning board approved site plan approvals, CVS, Ecowood Plaza. There's also a lot of naturally occurring roadside vegetation, oak trees, dense vegetation. And then there are those plantings that landowners have installed in their properties for beautification. Next slide. Particularly for the planning board approved projects, you know, here's an example of one that Gene had provided to us, noting in its record of decision that all plantings and screenings depicted on the approved plans referenced herein shall remain in perpetuity over the life of the project. So we are aware of these projects and we bring these kind of to your attention tonight. Next slide, please. These are some that we believe probably fall under this purview. There may be others. Certainly there are other things in the works, but mortar stone walls at Eaglewood Shops and CVS, fencing at Stop and Shop, the Crossroads and the former Rite Aid, and then buffer plantings consisting of trees, shrubs, and hedges at multiple locations. Next slide, please. So I think the question and the guidance we're looking for, and the sort of the feedback tonight is, it's a major project in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. I think Joe and Chuck really highlighted some of the benefits in terms of connectivity, taking it from a car-centric kind of a design to a new level, but recognizing these impacts and how they might impact developments. And I think kind of going down the list here, there is the recognition of the impact. We're curious as how the town would see the enforcement of restoration of those impacts and to what obligation that might fall with on the owner, recognizing that impacts will be compensated by MassDOT, but typically they wouldn't do the work. They would look for the owner to do the restoration. So is there some kind of process that would be put in place to bring impacted approved sites back into conformance, and then what's the vehicle for getting those repairs and rectification completed? So I think with that, that's the end of our presentation. I think we're looking for kind of general feedback, but also we'd like to get some input on this particular issue as to how the town maybe has handled this in the past, or how you might envision this laying out. So I will stop there.
To answer a little bit of that, I go back to John's comment. So, Chuck, I know we walked the Eaglewood Plaza with the property owner there, and I mean, my sense was the taking of the right-of-way extends beyond the stone wall and the mature plantings almost to the parking lot itself. And so even if there was some way to rectify this situation, there didn't seem to be enough land left on property to reinstall all those features. And so I think that was getting at, like, how much are we really talking? Where does this, like, new right-of-way end for that specific project? And I sent you North Mark Bank's submission today. I mean, although they referenced 32 feet, it seemed like a lot to me, but that's their perception, and that's a significant amount of wall and landscaping on their property as well.
So why don't we take some questions and then come back to this, because I also have some kind of comments on this, but I want to go to Peter's question that he had, and then take other questions kind of regarding the project if we can. So Peter, why don't you do your question, or any questions that you have?
My question is not related to this stone wall landscaping. It might be best if I wait till this is addressed, Eitan.
Okay, so we can address this first. Okay, so here's my thing on the stone walls is I strongly agree with John that not only does our zoning like specifically talk about this, but the board has gone over and beyond in really trying to maintain a structured and comprehensive set of rules and designs along 114. I mean, remember the guy that we had come back over and over again with the plantings down further at the auto body shop, and he went above and beyond in at least coming back, and we kept saying, no, we wanted this, no, we wanted this, and kept coming back. But the point is that we really have worked really hard on getting a whole level of cohesiveness among these different properties to kind of just at least create this image, and then to have these takings come and really do some great improvements to the road, but then take it all away is kind of disheartening. So I don't think we can advise you on, what necessarily to do. It's kind of the state's project, but I would say the planning board would be very opposed to really much of this coming down. And if you're going to take something, it should be put back in a cohesive manner. And I'm not sure that there's the room to do it. So, I mean, we'd leave it on you guys to figure it out, but there are two kind of things that you're going to have to think about. One, you're doing a taking, so you're going to have to compensate the actual owners of the property, but I'm not sure what rights the town has if you're going to take away portions that are part of conditions and now, they are impossible. What enforcement rights do we have there, and I think we'll have to examine that. I think the best way to be is put it back, but that's probably easier said than done. So I'm not sure how helpful that is, but
Well, I might respond to that, if I might. My understanding of the right-of-way process is that they compensate owners, and that typically replacement of things is often left to the owner. And I guess in this case, it's a little bit different, that because this was part of the process and approval of the development, you have vested stock in it. So the question is, at the end of the day, does the developer, aside from the fact whether he can actually restore it or not, is he obligated to restore it? Is that something that the board would put on him, or the town would put on him, each owner, to say, yes, you need to, we are aware of what's going on, you will be out of compliance, therefore we are issuing you a variance, we are requiring that you restore based upon the compensation of the state. I think that's the question we've been bantering about a little bit, as to how that process might go. And I know it's a little bit unusual, so don't necessarily expect an answer tonight, is to maybe to take it under advisement and kind of give us some feedback on that. Because I think the ultimate goal is we want to try to mitigate impacts, but we are trying to balance the improvements and the obvious sort of efficiencies in the corridor. So, does that make sense?
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I don't know if there's an answer to that. I mean, if I'm a landowner there and you're taking my property and paying me for it, obviously, but then the board says you have to now rebuild this wall. If I'm the landowner, I say, well, why do I have to rebuild it? Shouldn't MassDOT be paying for that? Or shouldn't they be paying for me to come back to the planning board to go through a modification process? I mean,
So,
they seem to be
Eitan,
taking.
put
Go ahead.
another way, wouldn't it be that another approach might be, not only does the state reimburse the owner for the taking of land, but the state reimburses the owner for the taking of the design features that now need to be replaced.
Correct. I mean, that's again, it seems to be that there are multiple parties here, so I appreciate they're coming to us to get our kind of input, but I think this is at least a three-way street. But it's not only just replacing it. I mean, it's can it actually be done, and can this cohesiveness that we've built still be maintained? And I don't know that it can.
I do think, I mean, one good thing is that we're early in the game, but I think we honestly should do some of the stuff we normally do with the planning board, is go out there, stake it, and see it, and, it's like, because can you slide it over here, can you move it over there, can you do this, can you do that? I mean, that's ultimately, because our preference would be, can you come up with a slightly different design that preserves some of these features?
Yeah, I agree with John. That's what we do. We go stake it out, or, the proposer stakes it out. I think that's what we need here.
I have a completely different question. When this, it's a two-part thing. One is, if construction starts in 2024, how long does it take? And the second question is, how much additional capacity will this provide, and how have you modeled that? If you could talk about that, both of those things, that'd be great.
I can probably address the first one. I'm thinking it's probably looking at approximately 3 construction seasons.
To speak to the traffic, we generally model the existing condition, which in our case, that was the year 2020 when we submitted our traffic study. And then we look at a design year, which is typically 20 years out. So we're looking at the year 2040. And we look at a model in the year 2040 both with and without the project improvements. So we can understand kind of how the corridor would behave without the improvements, and then how the corridor would behave with the improvements. And again, it's not a crystal ball, but it's a tool we use to kind of gauge how things may operate. And so we run those models to determine kind of how each intersection works, how the movements are processing, the capacity of each intersection. And we have a very thorough report, which certainly I could provide. But I would say, looking at some of the models, I was actually looking at them today to try to understand how I could paint a picture of try to simplify how this roadway may operate in the future year with the improvements. And, I was looking at average travel times along Route 114, basically for the 2-mile stretch during a PM peak hour, okay, in the year 2040. So I'd say it's a constrained time period. We use pre-COVID volumes. We then grew them for 20 years at 0.25% per year to account for some background traffic growth. And basically, what I was finding was that the average travel time in the year 2040 without the project was on the order of 26 minutes. And that's assuming a very constrained corridor in the year 2040 during the PM peak hour. With the project improvements, that travel time, the average travel time was reduced to 15 minutes. And so that's by again, we're incorporating pedestrian phasing, and that analysis takes into account some of the pedestrian phasing, but it's also taking into account the added travel lanes that we're looking to propose, and some of the other improvements and geometric improvements we're looking to make.
The key thing I heard you say in this is that basically you forecast for future demand. It's kind of like a secular growth factor that says volume is going to increase because you said 0.5% a year. Do you factor in point specific growth that is of an order of magnitude larger, like Royal Crest, into your analysis?
Typically our approach is to include, like you said, specific projects that have been approved. And we basically look at projects that have been approved but not yet constructed at the time of our data collection.
So the Royal Crest proposed project that you're well aware of and have met with them, that's not included currently, correct?
That's correct. They're not included in those our analyses at this time.
So do you have any idea or analysis that tells us if that project was approved as is with the numbers that have been proposed, what that does to your capacity over the 20 years and to the travel times and things like that?
We have not looked at that, but I believe, that's what Royal Crest traffic study looked at.
Okay, so you're
Hey,
familiar.
Tom,
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
you finish up, but I have a couple questions on this point.
Okay, so have you looked at their traffic study?
Just briefly, I have not perused it. I know I have not gone into a lot of detail on it.
So I mean, it's kind of important because if you're telling us that we're going to get 10 minutes of improved traffic, but their study, which they had the study and then we had our peer reviewer, and they seem to, at the end, be pretty much in agreement that a significant portion of the capacity is going to be taken up by the Royal Crest. Now, the road could handle it, but it seemed that...
Each one, the sound's gotten really bad. I don't know
Okay.
if anyone else on the phone, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I agree. Can't understand you, Eitan.
Okay. Joe, can you mute for a second? How are we doing now?
We have some others who are not muted. There's a 617.
That's Aaron.
Chuck just muted.
All right, how are we now? Peter, how's the sound?
Distorted.
Unreadable.
Do you say unreadable?
Yeah, I think that's what he said, but Peter, is the volume better?
It's hard to hear Jean. It's still really staticky.
I can hear Kelly very clearly. I can't hear Jean and I can't understand any of Eitan's. It got all garbled.
Well, why don't we go, Peter? Why don't you ask your questions?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So, what I was trying to say was that my understanding and remembrance of the traffic studies was, and someone please from the board correct me if your memory is different, was that a significant portion, maybe 75, 80% of the 20-year capacity would be taken up by the Royal Crest as proposed. So I guess I don't know if you had thoughts on that or how that affects your modeling if we have a large new development that takes up a significant portion, and how we should think about, does that 10 minutes of savings now become 2 minutes or 4 minutes or 0 minutes?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note, first of all, that, this is the project has objectives beyond vehicle capacity, which we've gone over. And I think everyone understands the benefits that we can get with sidewalks and ped safety and bicycle accommodations. And I understand the question completely about, we have a potential very large development adjacent to the project. Why aren't you accounting for it in your analysis? And I guess the answer is basically, MassDOT really can't, unfortunately, look at projects that are not unapproved because we've been in this situation plenty of times before where these projects end up not happening, and it's taking our time and effort and money for the sake of potential development, which may or may not go forward. So it puts us in an awkward position. And again, I'm saying this like, all due respect. I'm not saying, because I understand what you're saying, that it makes sense to take into account an adjacent development. But the issue is that analysis is on the developer. And like you said, it sounds like they've done that analysis. And if there's mitigation associated with that analysis, that's part of, their package. And we've coordinated with the developer in terms of, driveway locations, what they're expecting, to make sure we can be compatible with what they're proposing. And we're keeping our eye on, what mitigation might be needed. And, we're trying to coordinate those efforts to the best of our ability. But basically, we have to assume that our project moves forward with or without major development going on. We're just taking into account what's been approved, and we're including those developments within our analysis.
Eitan, can I ask a couple questions?
Let me just have one follow-up, and then I'll go to you, Peter. So one of the things in the traffic study that our peer reviewer mentioned was certain mitigation tactics, and I get where you're coming from. I don't. My comment wasn't to criticize MassDOT's approach. It's that we're considering zoning changes to Royal Crest, and part of that is a traffic study, and part of that traffic study involves MassDOT and your improvement project. So it's hard for us to make our determinations without getting your study and project involved, even though you're not taking that into consideration. So it also puts us in a difficult position of what to consider and how to consider it. So can you speak at all to the mitigation suggestions that have been made, including certain signalizations that would allow for better flow from Royal Crest, and how amenable MassDOT would be to making those mitigation, because those were an important point that Jeffrey Dirk had brought up in our discussions.
Yeah, part of what I've heard included an exclusive right turn lane into their site, which would be opposite Walsh Way there. That is one mitigation recommendation that I heard about. And I think there's pros and cons to that. You know, adding an exclusive right turn lane certainly has its benefit, but there's, you know, you have to consider how often that lane will be blocked by through queue traffic. So how effective can that right turn lane be? Also, by adding that right turn lane, we're actually increasing the crossing length for the crosswalk. So that's now exposing pedestrians to more, you know, risk, I would say, or exposure within the roadway surface because we've made it wider, which increases your crossing time. So that's a mitigation recommendation that I am aware of, and I think we would, you know, I think we would be receptive to whatever is decided, or you know, I think MassDOT. I don't know if MassDOT would actually, you know, build that right turn lane. I mean, that I don't know how to answer that question because it is associated with a development, but maybe there's a way.
Well, so as I said, one of the suggestions was for signalization. So I guess ultimately we have to vote on, you know, size and scope of this potential project, and traffic is one of our significant considerations. And one of the ways we got a certain list of mitigation. So are we able to submit those? You know, say we're going to make proposed zoning and some of the conditions might be certain traffic mitigation. Are we able to submit those to MassDOT for comments on, yes, this is something that we could do? No, absolutely not. This is something we would never consider. I mean, we're just trying to get as much information as possible for us in making our determinations of what kind of mitigation that we can, you know, condition.
Yeah, I mean,
Hey, Eitan, may I
Yes.
interrupt? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe one of those suggestions was adaptive traffic signal technology.
Yep.
Yeah, and we are proposing that as part of our project.
Okay. So it would just be helpful if we could take those lists and cross coordinate, because there's just so much data going back and forth, that would be kind of helpful. So like something like that, Chuck, is very helpful that, yes, okay, that's one that we can check off as, yes, that one's kind of on board, or ones that are definite no's or ones that are possibilities would be helpful for us in kind of crafting our ultimate zoning approvals.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we'd love to see that list and provide input and feedback on that. And as Chuck mentioned, adaptive signal technology is what is being proposed, and that's really the best technology available to adapt to real-time traffic conditions. So it's really an ideal solution for whatever happens along this corridor.
Okay. Peter?
Thanks, Eitan. I have two areas of questions. The second one, I want to go back in the slides to the earlier crosswalk that's being re-signalized, but not yet, not yet. What I want to do first, my first question is to follow up on this current theme of questions. And Joe, I like the way you characterized your answer to what was initially John's question about capacity, how you went through the models to help you understand how to paint a picture. I want to ask if you could see if you could paint that picture of the capacity delta in a little different way, in different terms, in different units, rather than the way John phrased it. I want to ask if you can paint a picture of how many years of traffic growth will this project accommodate? So is there some sort of design standard, or if not a standard, a design outcome where, yes, this type of project is generally expected to absorb normal traffic growth for 20 years or for 30 years, meaning that, you know, when that time passes, this roadway might need to be examined again for some different design changes. Can you paint a picture of capacity in terms of how many years worth of growth on this roadway this project will provide for? Years of growth.
Yeah, I think we could basically do some type of sensitivity analysis to see, like you said, at what point is this roadway at its capacity for all intents and purposes? Recognizing the fact that there could be limitations beyond this corridor that will limit this corridor itself. We have to assume,
Right.
where, but
Right.
yeah, I think that's something we can definitely take a look at. And
Can I, if I were to reword the question a little bit, is there any way, for just given your professional judgment and experience, for you to say, without doing a detailed analysis, this type of project on this type of roadway, we typically expect will give you 20 years, or this is a 50-year growth? I mean, just order of magnitude, do you have a sense of what is expected, or would that really require an analysis?
I think the hard part is really understanding, what is reasonable to expect for growth, what's realistic,
Right.
and it's so, particularly coming out of COVID and how will travel patterns be impacted? It's just,
Right. So,
yeah.
okay, that's fine. In your earlier answers, when you were painting the picture, I think I heard you say that when you were answering it in the direction that John was asking, and I thought you did a great job of addressing that. I thought you said, if we were to plan on a 0.25% growth a year, I think you said a quarter. Is that a standard sort of estimate of yearly growth, or is that something that's a little more tailored to this part of suburban Boston, or where does that come from? And is that that's pretty generally the reliable designs, standard? Where does that come from?
Typically, we look at traffic count stations that are right in your vicinity that are relative and appropriate for this area and the type of roadway. But we also will reach out to like the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, and understand, they may have more in-depth models, and so we'll get input from folks like them.
Okay. Let me illuminate a little bit why I was asking about whether or not you can paint the picture of how many years worth of anticipated growth this project would provide for. I almost view it in terms of a reverse mortgage. We, as the Commonwealth, are going to pay, this much money for this roadway improvement, and then we're going to buy it down each year until at the end of 20 years or at the end of 50 years, we've used up that mortgage investment, if you will. So the reason I'm asking this is when we have been talking to the Royal Crest proposal people, we kind of put this question to them as well. With your traffic study, how much of the projected years worth of growth capacity of the Mass DOT project, how much will be consumed as soon as the Royal Crest project is done? And that's a really important question for us to try to get our arms around. So I'm just trying to fill in, why am I asking you these questions? And the companion piece of that context is, you may have seen when you scan the traffic analysis, maybe Gene can correct me or other members of the board if I get this wrong, but just from memory, I think the analysis showed that the amount of traffic coming in and out of Royal Crest is going to increase by a factor of 3.5 to 4-fold. It's not a small increase. It's doing it right at this point where we know, there's already susceptibility because it's where the, big intersection between 114 and the 125, pass through there occurs. And it's also occurring right at the point where we anticipate really much larger pedestrian crossing between Merrimack College and the 1,000 beds or so that would be part of college beds that would be part of this Royal Crest proposal. So we really do have a kind of a ground zero effect here right where there is an anticipated 3.5 to 4-fold increase in cars being dumped onto the roadway there. So, and I have yet another companion question to that. Do you, and maybe this is Larry's question from a sort of strategic perspective of multiple Mass DOT projects, do you see developers, doing major proposals coincident with Mass DOT roadway improvements? Is this something that, wow, we really haven't seen this before? Or is this something where maybe not in every project, but yeah, a lot of times there are large-scale development proposals in play that intersect with major planned Mass DOT roadway improvements? Is that a phenomenon you tend to see, or not at all? Is there no correlation? Is there some correlation?
Yeah, no, it happens. It's just that the size of the project varies. It definitely happens. Sure, it does.
I mean, I kind of wonder about, is that coincidental that a large 70-acre property is being proposed for a major redevelopment with, multiple X factor of traffic increase at a point in time when it's public knowledge that there's a major Mass DOT roadway improvement project. And, part of that would be good planning, right? That, hey, we're going to dump a lot more cars on here. We should do it when Mass DOT is improving it. I mean, that's a sort of a laudable strategy. But the other part of it is sort of using public funds to support this private development, in a sort of oblique fashion. So that's part of what I'm trying to get at here. I do have a couple other companion questions here, but Larry, were you going to make another comment?
No, I was just saying, did you say that the development was expected to be, 3 or 4 times the existing, as far as
the existing 3.5, if my memory serves me correctly, and if it's not, it's very close to this, 3.5 to 4 times the current load of vehicles coming in and out of Royal Crest right at that intersection.
Okay,
that's what's proposed.
Yeah, I mean, the existing, I'm not particularly, I don't think it's really a very impressive volume, in my opinion, but that's just, it's probably because I see traffic everywhere. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
I'm just.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, it's not Starrow Drive, right? But did you mean by not an impressive amount of traffic, the current amount, or do you mean that in your world of work, a 3.5 to 4-fold increase really is not significant?
I mean, based on what I'm seeing, I don't think it's that significant, and it's certainly something that adaptive signal control could take care of.
Okay, that's very helpful. That's why I'm asking this. A couple other questions then.
Yeah,
Eitan,
one other thing, you also mentioned about the number of students too. I mean, the students they're not going to really be driving, in and out of there, to go to the college and all that. They're just going to walk across the street. So
that's why, yes, that's correct, Larry. That's why I said a heavy pedestrian load increase right at that same point where we've got a 3.5 to 4-fold increase of cars dumping on. You'll also have a coincidental large increase in the number of pedestrian crossings right there. So my other companion, and I'll try to move along, Eitan, but this one might be a little more from you. I think one of the things we should sort of put a placeholder on here, Eitan, is I think I heard the Mass DOT folks say that a project start in 2024 would continue for 3 or so construction seasons. So I would assume that I take it that means three years. Is that what you mean by 3 construction seasons? That means that we would have the anticipated, I assume, traffic congestion during construction for an extended period of time. And we should really be mindful of how that construction phase, where the act of construction, I would think, would cause, traffic problems until the construction is done. But if that's coinciding with the peaks of volume increases as a result of this proposal, we should just be very mindful of how those two timelines of Royal Crest proposal construction matches up on the calendar with the construction phase of these roadway improvements. And then I think just two more points. When folks were asking if you take into account large proposed projects like this one, I mean, I think you gave a very reasonable answer. You can't take into account every proposal because they don't all occur. But I just wanted to be clear, I would not be asking you to change your design based on a mere proposed project. But I would ask you, are you able to take into account, without changing your design, but if you have a proposal of significant size, are you able to take into account, here's the impact that this project would have if it is approved on our existing design? And we're not changing because it's only a proposal, but as a footnote, we think that this would have minimal impact, or this could have significant impact, or this could reduce the growth capacity in years from a 20-year runway to, you're only going to have 10 years of growth, that kind of thing. So I would just leave you with that question. And the last question I have is related to that, because again, Eitan, correct me if my memory is wrong here, but I thought that the Royal Crest applicants were at least suggesting that they were coordinating their aspirations with the Mass DOT project. And I would agree that there are conversations. The conversations, I think, are a very useful sign of good planning. But what I'm hearing today from Mass DOT is they're not coordinated. Mass DOT has their plan, subject to extraordinary planning process, extraordinarily good, but it is not adapting to the Royal Crest proposal. And so I just think I am going to be sort of more attuned to, if I'm hearing what I thought I had heard, at least implied, I want to understand, coordinated in what way with the Mass DOT project. And that's not focused at you, Joe or Larry. That's focused at the Royal Crest proposers. That's it, Eitan, but I would like to go back to that crossing. Can you zip back in the slides to where?
Can we talk about that last question first? Because that's not,
Yes, okay.
that wasn't exactly how I understood it. So I guess I would like a little clarity from Mass DOT. What I understood from Joe was that they don't take into consideration in their analysis of growth projects that aren't approved. Makes sense. But when there are projects that are being talked about, they do talk with those developers, and like you said, they mentioned like talking about curb cuts and aligning those and things like that. So I think from my understanding, is that they're kind of working through potential approaches together, but it's more that the calculations weren't done with Royal Crest. That was my impression. So I guess if someone from MassDOT could maybe clarify
very good question,
those.
Eitan. I would also ask for some clarity on whatever the level of coordination between the Royal Crest project proposers and Mass DOT, what exactly is that?
Yeah, so we've been, we want to make sure that the two projects are compatible. We don't want to preclude something that they may be planning. So we are looking at it to make sure that the projects are compatible to a degree. We've shared all of our analysis with them so that they can basically run their volumes in our proposed conditions. So to your point, Peter, they have looked at how their project impacts our project because we've shared our analysis with them for their use. We've also talked about pedestrian and bike accommodations and connections that might be necessary, because that's come up from MassDOT as they've reviewed our plans. How do we connect to these sites? And so we've asked them, well, what do you plan to do on your site for bike and pedestrian accommodations? So we can at least show the likely solution along Route 114. So we're talking to one another. I guess just what we aren't showing is, if a right turn is needed onto their site, we haven't just put that into our project because it's.
Is it fair for me to summarize, Joe, that you are talking, and look, I mean, we're glad you are. That's what we would expect and appreciate. But can I summarize this to say, although you are talking, although you are looking to see compatibilities, you are not changing your design based on this unapproved proposal?
That's correct.
Okay. Listen, the intersection I wanted to talk about, and I may have heard wrong, but it wasn't the Andover bypass intersection. I thought you had a slide before this. Yes. No. Go back one. Right there. I thought I heard you say that today that is a pedestrian crossing, and you're going to turn that into a full, roadway signaled. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So my question was this, and it's really a question of curiosity. I don't want to take too much time with it, but I remember kind of a big rollout when that pedestrian crossing was put in. I mean, I think it was really widely, viewed as a huge positive for the safety of all the students crossing, but now we're going to rework it. And I don't think it was done that long ago. It must have been during your planning process. So, I mean, are we undoing a lot that had been done when it was within your planning horizon? Or is it that, no, we knew that was going to be a pedestrian crossing and we're just adding to it? I just would like to understand how that project and this one overlaps in terms of sort of efficiency of approach.
Yeah. My understanding was that the signalized crossing that went in was more of like an interim improvement to solve an issue that was occurring out there. So it was kind of an immediate, safety improvement. That was
Okay. Yeah, that answers it and answers it well. And I think we would all agree that that type of interim safety step was a wise investment. Eitan, sorry it took so long. Those are my questions.
Good questions. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to see if any other members of the board have questions. I have one more, and then some comments came in that we're going to address. Then we'll go to the Royal Crest, do just a little bit of the financial stuff, but we're not going to spend too much more time tonight. It's based on the hour. It's getting a little late. Okay, so I will go to Kate. Are you here? Do you have any questions?
Nothing new to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, just one question. I was curious if the project had studied the possibility of, and that is by, increasing the roadway, actually maybe drawing more traffic through our town, because we're doing for instance, if somebody coming from maybe Salem, New Hampshire or Lawrence wants to get down to Salem, Danvers, Peabody, maybe right now they take 93 to 128 to get there. But maybe with this, maybe this would improve the situation. So now people decide, well, we'll just go down 114. So now we're still stuck with the same type of capacity, in a very short time, stuck with the same capacity issues, just with a much wider road. So I'm curious as to whether that aspect of this project was studied.
I think that's always kind of the challenge with these projects is, as you build more roadway capacity, like you said, it can become attractive for folks. People always take the path of least resistance. And unfortunately, that's kind of the reality. There were some key pinch points on this project that we're addressing, which I think will really help, particularly to the east of Hillside, where we have a 5-lane section on either end down by the Stop and Shop, and then as you approach the bypass. But you had this one segment in between where it was a pinch point. And so this project will address that without kind of increasing, I guess, the capacity outside of that necessarily. But, it's really hard to tell. But that the reality is that people do travel the path of least resistance. And if they find that this becomes a more attractive route, and I think that's kind of where we've come as transportation engineers, that reality that as you build wider roads, it often will attract more vehicles. And that's why MassDOT's taking more of a multimodal approach, where it's like we can't always solve the traffic problems, but we want to make better accommodations for all users, which is a more sustainable approach. So it's a great question. We have not necessarily looked at, will this draw more trips from other routes? That's not really something that we've looked at. But it is a good point, and it is the reality that it's likely to see some additional usage if it becomes more efficient and attractive to people traveling through the area.
That's all I had. Thank you.
And Kelly?
So just a question as you talk about with the multimodal, other aspects, the bike lanes and the sidewalks, is there any kind of analysis that you do in terms of how much use those will get, or how we can encourage as part of this more usage of those? Looks like quite a bit of a good investment to put those in. How many people are going to use them, and how do we encourage that? Is that part of this?
Yeah, I think there isn't necessarily, for instance, the shared use path, that being included in the project isn't really necessarily based on the anticipated usage. It's more a function of, how busy the roadway is. But MassDOT, we do look at walkability, like the potential for walkability on certain roadways. MassDOT's looked at that in like a broad picture of the state, like identify the routes that have the most potential for walking and biking. And that is something we take into account. And I think, MassDOT's perspective is we want to build this network, and we need to implement these components in all of our projects so that network continues to grow. I don't have anything specific to share with you in terms of how we promote multimodal accommodations or uses, but I think that with it in place, I think it's just going to become an option that wasn't there previously. So hopefully, people will see it as a benefit. Be like, I can walk. I don't need to get in my car to go a half mile or whatever it may be. I hope it just provides more options and opportunities. But I don't have anything specific at this point in terms of tools other than publicizing, where the networks are in the town and the connectivity that's available.
Could I jump in and add on to that? I would say the more end-to-end connections that we have, if there's, this is, one part of the bike network, and MassDOT's always looking to extend, create new pieces of that puzzle. You got Den Rock State Park, or not State Park, but Den Rock Park down there. It's just to the west of here. That's a desirable place to get to. The more connections that the town could build on would help. Maybe have programs to to promote it. That would help as well.
Thank you.
Bike shares, those are something that can help.
That was all my questions, Eton.
Okay, John?
Fine.
One question that I have that has come up in the past is a pedestrian bridge. Just any quick comments on the feasibility or lack of feasibility of a pedestrian bridge from Royal Crest to the college?
Mass DOT, I mean, we do not plan to build a pedestrian bridge as part of the project.
Has it been discussed, talked about, shot down?
In the packet, there was an opinion letter from them that they
Yeah,
provided.
well,
a
I
few
mean,
weeks ago.
it's certainly a cost issue. I mean, the project has escalated in cost as it is, so that's, you know, certainly one issue. The other issue is that it's more of a private property kind of pedestrian use, you know, going from what would be going from the development over to the college or back and forth. And, you know, whereas, you know, the project that we have here, we spend the corridor is the public way it's really kind of running with it longitudinally rather than going from over it as one private property to another. So that's really our position on it.
Okay. Okay. Well, and so we got a bunch of comments in. Gene, if you can read them. Again, I just do want to stress that, you know, the point of this was to get a presentation that there's nothing actually before the planning board to make determinations on or anything like that at this point. But we'll take the comments, and to the extent we can, we'll answer questions or push them to you guys.
Okay, so the
Hey,
first.
Ton, I'd just like to say that I think Mass DOT provided a really terrific briefing. It's great clarity. I thought candid and patient responses to a lot of questions. And I'm just very impressed and appreciative that you provided this overview, and I think it was very well done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So let's hear some public questions, comments, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, guys. Let's hear.
So this is 510, 530 Turnpike Street, abutters choice for Mass DOT options. Matt McGarry, John McGarry, the owner of 510 and 530 Turnpike Street with 35,000 square feet of office and retail buildings, would like to see the option 3 used in the latest of the Mass DOT plans with a direct access to the signalized intersection between Rural Crest and 510, 530 Turnpike Street. Option 2 is designed for possible future development of Rural Crest to the detriment of 510, 530 Turnpike Street property, which would go from 2 major and direct accesses, curb cuts on Route 114 to a back access behind some Rural Crest buildings. Plus, the access would depend on Rural Crest giving us an easement. Option 3 is the fairest choice, and it will give 510, 530 Turnpike Street and Rural Crest direct access from Route 114. Matt McGarry.
Okay.
So Chuck, can you remind us what the proposal you thought was the best option? Was it 2 or 3?
Option 2 is what we showed to you tonight, and that's pretty much what was shown more or less at the 25% design level. We did look at option 3, which brought the Andover bypass intersection further to the east. The problem with option 3 is that it would require MassDOT to place a signal and build the northern leg onto Royal Crest property and force a cross access onto the 510, 530 property. That would be not with what MassDOT really should be doing or can do legally. We cannot acquire property from somebody else for the sole purpose of helping an adjacent property owner. So option 3 really just isn't something that MassDOT can do. Larry, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yes, that's correct. That's what the right-of-way department had explained to us. That's correct, Chuck.
Okay. Next comment, please, Gene.
Okay, so now we have several from Jimmy D'Angelo. Gene, and a lot of these are going to reference what's in the packet is a letter from representatives for North Mark Bank and for the Mass DOT team. I sent that to you earlier today. So Gene, we reviewed the revised presentation with the addition of neighborhood conductivity. Our questions remain the same regarding the environmental review process. The schedule as proposed does not show MIPA process. When will Mass DOT file an environmental notification form, ENF, for the project? Should Mass DOT be filing now as conceptual design with cross-sections show the extent of impact on abutting users, wetlands and mature trees, as opposed to advancing the design to the 75% design stage?
So to answer that question, we start seriously doing the permitting after the 75% design. That's when the right-of-way typically is locked down. So we know the design is taken to a pretty extensive level. So we definitely know that we need to do an ENF for this project, and that will be taken care of at that time.
So should the schedule account for the time it takes to get through the MIPA process?
The schedule does account for that. Yeah, the largest part of the schedule time will be for this large of a project. Obviously, there are right-of-way acquisition, along the whole corridor. That's going to take over a year to do just alone. So that will be critical path once we get to 75% plans. So yeah, when we're not advertising till, we're looking at late 2023 for advertisement at the earliest.
What do you mean by advertisement?
That is when we put the project, we advertise the project plans, specs, and send that out to contractors and who bid on the project. And
yeah, it's an ad that goes in the paper, and it alerts everyone to the prospective contractors that the project's coming out, and then we now release the documents about the following week to the contractors, and they'll have about a job this size. They'll have about 4 weeks to look at the job. It's for a federal job. It's always a minimum of 21.
Okay.
so then we anticipate construction beginning in the spring of 2024.
Okay.
Hope that makes sense.
Okay, again, Jimmy D'Angelo, please explain how access to Jefferson Office Park is intended to work. Will left turn in or out be allowed? So that's the park at the Willow Street intersection.
Yeah, so currently, I mean, that left turn should not out of there. That office park should not be allowed, but I don't know that is, it's not physically prohibited.
Yeah, I could say, Chuck, we're not looking to change the access at that driveway location from how it currently functions.
Yeah, the geometry here really doesn't change much.
Okay. Jimmy D'Angelo again, why is developer responsible for restoring their property? Really need to go through the full environmental process to fully evaluate impacts and options. Ask town to be supportive of going through that process.
Not really sure what that means. I mean,
Supportive of going through the environmental process, so the MIPA review.
well, MIPA has obviously certain thresholds, and if they,
Yeah.
I mean, the town doesn't really have much say in that. I mean, I think where the town's gonna have to be able to put down our say is in those walls and landscaping and how we make sure that that gets fairly and cohesively restored, to the extent that we can.
Okay, Jimmy D'Angelo, we have pedestrian connectivity in the western section now with sidewalks. Adding the multi-purpose path has impacts on abutters. Alternative design would provide multi-purpose path from Peter Street east, which would provide the connectivity with the sidewalk system, which is already in place. Okay.
I do think that's the kind of thing when we go out and stake stuff, you gotta decide, if you're losing 10 feet to create one use, is it better to keep what you had?
Well, again, that's why these are 25%. I mean, I think that's next 50% is important in getting those kind of final
Yeah.
details, but I'm not sure this meeting is the
No.
great space for that.
Again, if Mass DOT files ENF, it must consider rural crest as base condition. So it's not really a question.
Okay.
Jimmy D'Angelo, they will get scoped to include rural crest as rural crest has filed its ENF. They were first. I didn't know that. And Jimmy D'Angelo again, rural crest mitigation plan must stand on its own. Their mitigation can consider the potential of Mass DOT project and try to be consistent with it, perhaps by building portions of the approved project. Mass DOT project needs to go through their own permitting process. Please make them go through that process. It is impressive because it is loaded only at one roadway.
So I do agree with the point that the Royal Crest and the Mass DOT both need to stand on their own. But I think that to Peter's question earlier, and I think, I'm not sure if it was maybe Chuck's response or Joe's response, that, they're not working together in the sense that the Mass DOT is going to change their project to accommodate Royal Crest, but they've given all the information to Royal Crest, their data, the plans, and Royal Crest is able to adapt their plans into what Mass DOT is planning. So I think that coordination is important, but they do both need to stand on their own. But again, the town is not a MIPA enforcement division, so that's up to MIPA.
That was the last one.
Okay, that's all the comments?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I would echo Peter's comments earlier that we appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation, the answering of the questions, and I think this was really helpful in getting a sense of where things are. And I would just encourage as much as you can, when significant items come up, when, you have new information, to provide that to the town in as broad a capacity as possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Our agenda, Royal Crest. We're not going to do any more general comments tonight. Site visit, May 25th, 2021, 6 p.m. for balloon test. That's confirmed. Is that right?
Yeah, but we have a little bit of material to review on that logistics-wise, and we're going to meet and
Okay, so
they're prepared to show.
let's do that now.
Okay, if I could just add quick housekeeping. So one resident comment came in support of the project. It is in the packet. It was submitted by Karen Martin, Chair, North Parish Climate Justice Group, and there's a list of co-signers on that as well.
And I think they talked about the energy efficiency of the project and their approval of that. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, so it is confirmed for the 26th at 6 for the board to meet. I am trying to cast.
Members of the public can attend, is that right?
Members of the public can attend. It'll be posted as a site visit with no deliberation. So we typically just have a presentation from the proponents, kind of describing what we're there to see, what they've provided in terms of the balloons, the locations, the heights of buildings and whatnot. If people have questions, including board members, they should write the questions down and they should be discussed in the next public hearing.
Okay, so just to be clear as to what we're doing and what to anticipate and what not to anticipate, balloons will be placed at 1, 2, or how many? Do we know how many?
Okay, so Mike, are you on the call?
I am.
Okay.
So
Yes.
you'll go through that in a second. But we're going to see some balloons placed in the sky. Hopefully earlier in the day they can be placed there. Obviously, weather plays a significant role in how successful this is going to be. But the point of this is just to get a general sense, if we can, of the heights of the buildings in comparison to what's there now, in comparison to the neighborhood, things like that. It's not necessarily a substitute for other types of ways that we could get information and comparisons, view sheds and pictures and things like that. But it's a first step in us to trying to understand kind of the comparative heights. It's just one tool. We may use other tools depending on how useful this is. We've done ones in the past. Avalon one didn't really help us because the weather was terrible and the buildings were kind of far away and it was hard to get a comparison. On the other hand, we've done cell tower ones where I think it's been very helpful in getting a kind of a sense of really how tall it was compared to trees that were local and things like that. So we'll kind of just see how it goes, and hopefully it'll be useful information. And if it winds up not being, then we'll go on to trying something else. We're not going to talk about anything really, have a discussion at that meeting. It's just a site visit, so the board members cannot deliberate. So there will be information given to us, and then we'll come back at the next meeting and talk about it. Like Jean said, if there are questions, write them down, email them to Jean, and we'll talk about it at the next meeting. It is possible that that next meeting will be in person. We just don't know yet. So Mike, tell us what we're going to do and where we're going to meet.
Yes. So Jean has the plan that we have proposed. We're proposing to place the balloons at 9 different locations, specifically to highlight the perimeter conditions, as well as to locate the balloons at the highest locations that we are proposing. So they're located at the highest buildings. Most of those are located within or around our proposed town green. So it should give the board a sense of the size of that public space that we are proposing. And the other locations are proximate to the property lines and abutters where there have been questions from the board. So this plan shows those locations.
And Mike,
The blue.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say.
You'll have copies of this plan available at the site visit if residents are.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And we do plan to have the balloons up all afternoon prior to 6 p.m. So for any members of the board or any members of the public who want to view it from abutting streets or the neighborhoods, they will be available all afternoon.
Where are we going to meet?
We will meet at the clubhouse property management office, central on the site, and then we'll walk around to the different locations.
So when you drive in the main entrance, you just continue straight. It's on the right. There's parking in front of the clubhouse. So it's about central.
If we could maybe have some signs, or a sign just saying, "Hey, clubhouse" or planning board meeting or something like that. That would be good.
Yes, there is signage on site, but we'll make sure that that's highlighted.
Okay, great. Anything else, Jean, on that?
Yep. Like, do you want to talk about the drone?
Yeah, so we will also have available a drone, which is somewhat newer technology, but if there are other questions of the board, we can highlight other locations sort of on the fly, if you will.
Good one.
But yes. But it should be able to augment the balloons themselves.
We wouldn't want the presentation to be too robotic. All right. Yeah. Okay.
It's getting low.
Financial impacts.
Okay.
So why don't you walk us through the additional document that was submitted?
So Mike Mark wasn't able to attend, right? So do you want to provide the overview?
That's correct.
Do you want to
That's
provide the
correct.
overview of what he submitted?
Yes, I can do that. So essentially, we answered the question that was posed by the board at the last meeting related to the fiscal impact analysis. Essentially, what was done by our consultants was to look at, or essentially to compare net to net. So he netted out the existing revenues provided by the existing Royal Crest to show a net to net comparison. What he also did was to show, the existing costs utilizing the same data that's within the report, already within the report, and applied it to the existing Royal Crest as well, compared to that existing revenue, which is presented in this supplemental report.
Is that table 1 on page 4?
That is correct.
So can we go to that? All right, so table 1 on page 4, as I understand it then, is existing right now, how much the town takes in tax revenue versus the costs using the same formulas for cost as were done for the proposal, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then table 2 below is what we had before in terms of net costs and revenues for the projected Royal Crest. And then table 3 is a comparison, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So
Okay.
table 2 is the net to net comparison. Table 3 looks at the existing costs, the proposed cost, the net new costs, and
Okay.
tells of what we feel is a fuller picture.
Okay. And then, okay. So I think this is what we were looking for, and I appreciate that that's what you put together. I mean, I thought it was interesting to note that the current existing Royal Crest net negative impact of anywhere between basically $500,000 to $1.5 million. Because one of the things we hear is, the project, this could go nowhere and we could do nothing, and we still have what we have now, which is a net negative. That doesn't mean, hey, let's just do whatever we want because it's going to be a positive. But I think it's important to put into perspective that what we have now, and you guys have been kind of saying it's run down, it's served some of its useful life, but I think these numbers help kind of tell that story of where things are now, and getting a better comparison of where they, just the numbers, obviously we still have to look at other things other than just numbers, could be with your proposal. So I think it's a more useful chart for us to be able to consider.
Hey, Ton, very difficult to understand you again.
Do you hear me, Peter?
Still bad. Kelly, can you say something?
Are we clear now?
You're on mute.
I certainly can.
Yeah, Kelly's clear as a bell.
Okay. Can you go back for a quick second, change to the first one?
To table 1?
Yeah, okay. The point in all this in terms of the cost is obviously the school number is the overwhelmingly large one, as you would anticipate, because it's the largest cost we have in the town. But did we last time, maybe I missed it, do we have the actual number of students and what unit cost they use to price that out? I'm just curious. I'm just wondering, how many students and what was the number for the average cost per student?
That is in the original report. I believe the number is 213 existing students. I don't have right in front of me the unit cost, but that is within the original report.
Okay.
So this was was sent to the town's peer reviewer, Judy Barrett. I don't have anything in writing. However, she did speak with Andrew Shapiro today, and he confirmed that it is consistent with her discussions with Mark Fisher, so.
Any other comments from board members?
All set, anytime.
All right, well, I think just combining all of those, I think, gives us a real useful tool for the analysis and for an ultimate, decision. And I think these charts are actually really helpful. I think the data was good before, but I think these charts really kind of put it into context for us. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So next to the balloon test, and then go from there. Jean?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll see you all next week.
Looking forward to it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll save the minutes. Just too tired. Anything else before we adjourn? So next week will be the meeting at the site visit. As I sort of I was talking with Suzanne a little bit earlier, and emails we're getting from town manager. It appears that as of May 29th, things may go back to our normal order of business. The state is looking at, as I understand it, if they're going to make any modifications to meetings or open meeting law. I'm hoping, based on kind of the experiments, that there may be some more flexibility in how we do things. But just if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, please let me know and we'll see what we can do.
Hey, Tom, Town Hall sent out an email at 6:20 this evening. It's about the, updates on COVID-19 response. But if you scroll down in the email, it says in boldface text, at this time, we anticipate public meetings will return to normal operations effective May 29th.
Right. Okay, so maybe we'll see everybody here on June 1st. It'll be interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to say, Eitan, that if we do all show up, just as a reminder, former chair always used to bring snacks for everyone on the board.
I remember that. I remember that. Have they changed the drinking in the buildings rule yet? Not yet.
They have not.
Just thought I'd ask.
Nope, they haven't stopped allowing it at all.
Right.
It's surprising.
Yeah. Okay, can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aaron?
Zarinel, second.
Okay, are you going to vote yes?
Oh, yeah, I'll vote yes.
Cool. Peter?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Yep, for me too. All right.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.